All right, I think we are ready to get started. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to our two-day, it's day one of a two-day Microsoft Virtual Roadshow event. We are very excited here at Egroop to have everybody join us today. Looking forward to a great day filled with lots of information from a number of our experts around the specific Microsoft solutions. I'm Krista Anderson. I'm the Director of Alliances here at Egroop. Very excited to be working with Microsoft on our partnership and excited about what we have to present to you today. Jason, if you want to go to the next slide, we'll touch on a couple of housekeeping things really quick before we get started. Just so everybody knows, we do have the entire team muted so that we don't distract any of these speakers when they're speaking today. Please do feel free at any point today to put any questions that you have in the chat. We have people on standby that will be answering those questions throughout the chat. In addition to, if we have time at the end of each presentation for some Q&A, we may bring up some of those questions live and answer them. So please do not be afraid to ask any questions if you have them. Breaks. We're going to take some breaks between each session, give everybody 5 minutes to take a bio break and step away. We may slightly adjust the timing of our presentations, just to keep the day moving, but we will look forward to lots of information to share with you today. And then the best part of it is prizes. We've got some prizes at the end that are available, so please make sure that you stay for the end to hear who the big winners are, and we're looking forward to a good day. So a little bit on today's agenda. Obviously, we're doing the welcome and introductions right now. I'm going to turn it over to Jason Webster in a moment. Jason's one of the principals here at Egroop and covers our Mid-Atlantic territory. He's going to tell you a little bit about Egroop and who we are. Then we're going to have Jason talk a little bit more about getting it done with Egroop and some of the mini workshops that we have available and the different workloads and solutions within Microsoft that those workshops touch, such as Microsoft Teams, email migrations, Teams Voice, Power Automate. So lots of information in there. And then after that, we'll be following up with Jesus Shelby. Jesus is the director of our Cloud and Managed Services division, and he's going to be talking to you about security with Microsoft and how we can defend against threats. We all know that's a very hot topic in today's day. And then lastly, we will have John Baer, who is one of our sales engineers. And John is going to be talking about modernizing file management with Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive. So lots of good information. And Jason, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm looking forward to hear what you have to say.
Thanks, Krista. And I'll lead off with the first slide mistake of the day. Did not update the previous slide on the prizes. So as to the right, Carly has come up with, our esteemed marketing manager has come up with some better prizes than last time to be creative and come up with some different things. So you do the prize at the end of the day must be present to win. We will draw the names randomly from the attendance list, but is an Ember coffee mug. Someone that has seen one of these, it's a temperature controlled, like way too smart coffee mug that basically keeps your beverage at the ideal temperature that you want. So one of those things that you can't live without, but you definitely wouldn't by yourself. And then the other one for those that like music, kind of a cool take on a Bluetooth speaker. These actually can separate and do surround sound. So we have that. And then of course, for those that aren't into the prizes, it's always an option to donate the winnings there, the $150 donation to the charity of your choice. Always happy to support charities and help those out, but totally the choice of the winner. So moving on from the prizes, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. I want to say this is the fourth or fifth year that we've done the semi-annual virtual roadshow. Really excited to make that virtual part go away. I think I've said that the last 3 or 4 times, and every time I really think it's going to be the last one so that we can get back out there and get in person. But really, really excited to do that. My name's Jason Webster. As Krista mentioned, I'm one of the principals at Egroop, responsible for our Mid-Atlantic practice. And really just looking forward to bringing you great information. So to kind of summarize how we're going to treat today, I'm going to lead us off with a high level summary of what we call the Egroop Modern Workplace Roadmap, which is essentially helping organizations adopt the things that they have within their Microsoft 365 solutions. Whether we're talking about the early stages of Exchange Online and securing email and some of those things, or we're talking about some of the downstream things like mobile device management, advanced security, compliance, or anywhere in between with Teams, OneDrive, SharePoint, and all those things. My goal in my presentation is to share with you how we can help you do all of that. Help you build a plan that will wow your end users, create great success, and help you, efficiently and effectively adopt these solutions and have them work together so that you can reduce that management time, you can reduce your total cost by consolidation, all of those great things. Or depending on where you're at in your journey with that, maybe just slice off a few of those things, kind of like a checklist. It's like going and ordering sushi or charcuterie. You get a menu and you get a pencil. Which ones do you want? Let's check it off, and we'll be able to deliver those. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the specifics of those. Those of you who have joined our Modern Workplace Roadmap webinars prior will see the format and recognize it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a little bit more stories along the way of each one of organizations that have taken those on and what the results have been. So it's not just what we can do, but it's more along the lines of how others have been successful with it. So if the first part's a little high level, we're going to go through that. Really want to set the stage. I'll talk about incentive programs. I'll talk about what these solutions are. Make sure that we're all level set on our knowledge of what Microsoft 365 can offer. We're going to really bring in the big guns with Jesus and John for the next two, which is Jesus is going to go a little bit deeper. Let's be honest, a lot deeper into securing the end user experience against today's threats. Really, not 2022 threats, but the year 2022 threats that we have. But sometimes it feels like 2022 threats. He's going to go a lot deeper into that, and it's going to be a little bit of a taste of exactly what those workshops would be like. So it'll be generic to all organizations, but the idea there is if we're talking about mobile device management, Defender, we're talking about advanced security and compliance and identity management. The idea there is what Jesus is presenting. We can bring that, have a discussion about your organization, your specific needs, and make it relevant to you. And then lastly, but certainly not least, John's going to come up and talk about one of the most popular things that we're seeing today, which is organizations trying to modernize their approach to file management, whether that's user files that are flexible, organizational files that are kind of the typical department file shares that get dumped out there and backed up forever and nobody really knows what's in them or how to get rid of them. Some of those types of things. We'll talk some more about that and talk about how you can modernize your approach to sharing in files. So a little bit of light and then a couple deep dive sessions. First, really quick, couple things about Egroop. We'll touch on this early, and then we'll kind of wrap up with some of this information as well, just who we are for those that aren't aware of us. We were founded in 1999, over 2 decades now of delivering successful outcomes for our clients. We always say that our clients are our chief investors in the organization, and your success is ultimately our success. And with that client-centric focus, we've had the opportunity to live vicariously through your successes over the years, and it's been a lot of fun seeing what you all achieve with some of the implementations and solutions that we put in place. We are a managed national partner with Microsoft with focus on 2 of the Microsoft clouds, one being Microsoft 365 and the other being Azure. But really, there's a third cloud in there as well, which is the security plane that goes between them, whether we're talking about securing Microsoft 365 or we're talking about securing Azure. I will say those that are interested in Azure, we do have the Roadshow for tomorrow as well, where we're going to focus much more on the Azure components of the conversation. Today is focused on Microsoft 365, but what you'll see is kind of the security model and some of the things that we can do there stretch across both, particularly where things like identity management is important, which it certainly is everywhere. And when it comes to Microsoft 365, deep experience and not just, kind of what I always call the basics of Exchange and OneDrive and, helping end users, but going into helping organizations be successful with collaboration on tools like we're using today with Teams. Um, Doing things like extending that into the voice and calling solution, minimizing the desk footprint and all the moving parts so that, organizations have the ability to, have enterprise dialing wherever you want through Teams. Advanced security. Again, you're going to hear me say security a lot today. It's extremely important and certainly at the forefront of everything we do. Intune, Defender, when I talk about those, there's security solutions within there, but also at the same time, kind of completing that complete story. Things like Autopilot, which has been extremely popular. If you don't know what Autopilot is, we'll talk a little bit about it. But in essence, it's the ability to grab any device, kind of off the shelf, authenticate, enroll, and through the security mechanisms, and be able to get to work without having to do a lot of the imaging things we've done in the past from an IT management standpoint. Windows 10 and 11. Yes, Windows 11 is out. A lot of people are using it. See it in a lot of people's backgrounds. Talk about how we can do that, whether that's on a physical device, whether that's on a Surface device, whether it's on or an Azure Virtual Desktop. And then some of the conversations we've been hearing a lot more about lately is the integration of those seed solutions. How can we aggregate all the information and intelligence we have together so that we can create a single pane to monitor our threats internally, or by connecting in third-party providers to be able to provide that intrusion detection and response capability that we have. Egroop has experience across this entire spectrum, including some of the things like automation and business process automation that you see within the Power Platforms suite. So beyond that Microsoft 365, as I said, we were founded in 1999, so we say, born in the data center, living in the cloud these days, right? So it's not all about just Microsoft 365 solutions and SaaS platforms. If we're talking about infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, building your applications and building your infrastructure inside of Azure, or for those organizations where we always say, all applications are not destined for the cloud. Some have very real reasons why they need to remain on premises. Legacy applications certainly meet a lot of that, but there are a lot of use cases, particularly within a lot of the healthcare, financial, legal organizations that we work with for running it on-prem. We have that capability and expertise to build those hybrid platforms so that ultimately you can run an application where it should be run, where it's most effective for your clients and customers, as well as your organization, whether we're talking about high availability, resiliency, performance-wise, scalability, or even the all-important cost. Where is it going to cost me the least to run this? We have a suite of data center products to go alongside Microsoft 365 and Azure to create that hybrid cloud architecture, but also the security, disaster recovery, and enterprise data protection that you would expect as a small business all the way into the Fortune 50. So diving into the meat of this a little bit after the introduction, what I always like to lead off with, and I'm going to come back to this at the very, very end of the presentation and bring this slide back up, which is talking about our incentive programs. These are the mechanisms that, the words may not resonate with you as much, but these are the mechanism and the levers that Egroop can use provided by Microsoft to help you get started with all of the ideas that we have today. So on the left, you will talk about that much more in detail with the Azure presentation tomorrow, but over on the right in green, there are many programs that we have that can help you adopt solutions, increase your security, kind of assess your current footprint. If John's presentation later about moving files to the cloud makes sense, there's incentive programs around that. And what we mean by incentives is for qualified customers, I do have to say, big asterisk, qualified customers. Each of these has different metrics in which organizations qualify for them. So unfortunately, fortunately, the good news is they're pretty flexible in that, because Microsoft wants to help organizations adopt these solutions, but certain criteria and certain gates, if you will, have to be met. We can help you navigate those and determine what funding may be available. But these are all funding programs to help you adopt Microsoft 365 solutions or secure your environment through the tools that Microsoft has, or the kind of doing the best practices configurations, whether we're talking about Microsoft 365 or Azure. So, key point as we're discussing opportunities throughout, whether it's a mini workshop, which I'm going to get into, whether we're talking about file migrations, where we're talking about securing against 2022 threats, all of those things have these programs available to them that we can work with you and see what you qualify for to help you get more done with the dollars that are available to you. A lot of the flexible ones like Microsoft 365, Azure, or Microsoft 365 and Azure Everywhere that are kind of general programs. There's specific programs for Teams adoption, which is certainly important. If you have Teams in your environment, or maybe you're licensed for Teams but don't know how to employ it, that's exactly what that's used for. As an example, we can get it there, build you a plan, and help you get that off the ground. But probably the one we're seeing the most is the Microsoft 365 security assessment. This is for organizations that are looking at their overall security between Microsoft 365 and Azure, looking to assess where they currently are with what they have or where they could be, and looking to understand, how additional advanced components like the advanced compliance and Intune and Defender and autopilot and all these different capabilities can help them build a more simplistic but more secure and manageable security posture. It's a invite only program for partners like ourselves, where very few partners worldwide are accepted into the program, and it's something that is available to a very wide swath of clients to be able to help them secure, because obviously Microsoft has intense interest in ensuring that you're protected while they're on their platforms. And part of that protection means that you're adopting the right solutions and they're configured to work together the right way. So, long story short, lots of incentive programs out there. So, if you have any questions about that, we'll come back to the end and remind about these, but we can help connect those dots for you. Okay, so a lot of the disclaimer, kind of high level stuff is out of the way. Wanted to, before I get started and talking about the mini workshops, remind all our presenters today, but also you yourselves, these are the things that came across when we asked, why are you attending? What are you most interested in? Um, and you gave us a really good list. So we're going to try to make sure we hit specifically on all of these today. The number one thing that people were saying that they're really interested in is mobile device security and endpoint security. Excuse me. This is effectively, how do we secure endpoints? How do we do things like multi-factor authentication? How do we do things like device management and device compliance and policy through products like Intune? How do we secure that device with the Windows Defender suite? And then how do we manage things like patches and updates with Endpoint Manager? Maybe you have SCCM today or other tools, and how do we blend those together? We'll talk about very specifically we have there. I mean, your number one request aligns with the number one thing that a lot of organizations have been working on, over the last couple of years, particularly driven by remote work and things along those lines. But ultimately, as we've transitioned, everybody's transitioned to remote work. What we're seeing with that one specifically is that, as organizations are either coming back into the office, it's opened up a lot of eyes that we can reduce cost and reduce management time through the consolidation of these solutions, while also increasing our security. So we'll talk a good bit about that throughout everything we have. Security is the other one, which really is the first and second bullet point people had listed. That includes, good management and updates and patching and all that stuff. And enrollment is a component of the overall security picture. But when we talk about security, we're also talking about things like identity security, multi-factor authentication, cloud access security brokers, all the different things that are in the advanced compliance, maybe even getting into solutions like the data loss prevention solutions and discovery solutions, depending on what industry you're in and where you need to be, to ensure that ultimately the users accessing your corporate data are who they say they are. The devices and places that they're accessing that information are managed and secure. Quote unquote secure. We'll have to get a lot more detail on what it means to be able to say I'm secure, and that only use that information in a way that the organization wants them to, meaning, kind of preventing data exfiltration and some of those things, or, accidental or malicious sharing of, key corporate information that we want to keep private. Teams and Teams Voice, that's another one. Teams Voice is absolutely on the rise. Organizations are seeing the benefits of not only deploying Teams over top of platforms like Zoom and WebEx and GoToMeeting and some of those, such not just for the video conferencing components of those, but the integration of workspaces and chats and the ability to have the channels so that you can communicate. Also the ability to call and interact with each other. We always see this very natural motion that happens after launching a Teams and a Teams voice solution, where initially everybody's still using their cell phones and they're still trying to dial in, but they over time realize it becomes really, really easy to just operate my day out of the Teams app, start using chat for those things I need quick responses to, as opposed to, masses of emails. And if I need to call somebody, kind of clicking their face on my phone and just hitting the call button and making that a Teams call versus a voice call or a mobile call. It's one of those processes that I always get excited about, because having done this for a long time, I always say, the most successful solutions are the ones that are intuitive and self-adopted. And we certainly see that momentum with Teams, whereas when they get over the mental hump that we've just inflicted a lot of change on them as end users, and we all know end users love change, they kind of start to see and intuit the benefits, and they see what other people are doing, and it becomes an experience that people talk about and say, wow, I really, really like this. Once they get over that mental hump, that it is different and there is a change required to be able to make it happen. Yeah, so some of the other ones we'll definitely hit on: virtual desktop and Sentinel, Power Automate, and email migrations. Those are some of the things that we always see along the way, but I'll hit on some specific solutions around that. But just wanted to share what you're all interested in. So please hold us accountable. If throughout the day you do not see something or do not hear something, that's definitely what the chat's for. Please definitely reach out. So, presentation number one: what is Microsoft 365? What I am hoping to share with you in this presentation, as I mentioned before, is the modern workplace roadmap. But again, we're doing kind of a checkbox style checklist thing that understands that, there's two things that organizations want today. They want to effectively adopt solutions that work and, work on their own and are smart and don't require a lot of management. But they also don't have a lot of time to talk about it, interact with it, and they've got a lot of demands on them from, coming at all different angles. So where we used to, as a primary mechanism, and we still do this and it's still effective, we would meet at like a Microsoft MTC, one of their technology centers near you, meet at your office, meet at, a place of general agreement, and we would spend a day or two kind of understanding business requirements and going through those types of things and talking through all these topics to build you a comprehensive Microsoft 365 plan. We realize in the virtual world, in today's world, that's not always possible. It's not always possible to get 12 people in a room for 2 straight days and have that disruption. So how can we break that up and deliver that more effectively, whether we want to focus on securing identity or we want to go all the way to data loss prevention, making sure that you have that comprehensive plan, but also an acknowledgement that most organizations have some of these things in place today and are really focused on what are the things that they don't have that would complete the picture. We've created many workshops that allow you to check off the things you're interested in and engage independently, but still the ultimate goal that we have is to understand where you are as a business and help you plan that path to where you want to be in the pieces along the way with actionable guidance. So we'll be sharing those stories. It's part of the level setting exercise. It's no surprise that when Microsoft does a lot, and the names change a lot as well. So there's always kind of confusion on what something is. So when we talk about Office 365, we're really talking about the things along the left, which are the productivity tools within the platform. Things like Exchange for your email, SharePoint for your files and company intranets, OneDrive for your personal-ish files, still business files, but personally managed by you, Teams, all those different things that are along the way. That's the productivity platform for Microsoft for end user productivity. But with Microsoft 365, it combines two additional components into the bundle that allow you to kind of do more. One is that enterprise mobility and security suite. So that's where we get into things like advanced security, multi-factor authentication, Intune with mobile device management. How do we do the updating, patching? How do we do cloud access security and autopilot? That's the advanced components of being able to do effectively what you need today. Won't talk too much about that because I'll steal a lot of Jesus's thunder and we'll just repeat each other. So he'll be bringing kind of that component into how that marries into Office 365, but also the Windows 10, Windows 11 experience, where you have active licenses as part of those bundles for Windows 11, Windows 10, to be able to do the advanced encryption and advanced device management that you need on devices, and bringing that all together to help simplify the licensing. But at the same time, a lot of people, when we get into conversations, we're talking about Office 365, E1, E3, F1, E5, all those things. And then we're talking about M365. The differences are significant, but the letter is just changing once on those licensing. So when we refer to Microsoft 365, we're talking about the full breadth of these solutions. And when we talk about Office 365, we're specifically talking about the productivity suite, and their licensing bundles. Just trust us. We know these in and out. We can help you find the exact bundle that makes the most sense for you based on your use case as part of these workshops, so that you're not buying technology that you're not putting in place, and never using, never getting value from, but you're also not under buying technology that's going to kind of licensing a la carte you to death over time. And when we do this, but it really starts with understanding your business needs. This isn't a catch-all solution where everybody does the same thing. Everybody, you know, implements the same technology. With Microsoft 365. It can be a little bit more that way, particularly than the Azure side. But from Egroop side, as we mentioned, our client success is our chief investor in our success. We really want to understand your business needs. And to do so with M365 really comes down to understanding your end users. What do they need? What are they doing to provide value to your clients? What experience do they need? Whether they're maybe they're mobile and they're in retail. This is a retail office. Maybe they're part of a manufacturing or professional services organization, and there's a component, that's in the warehouse doing, different things from a warehouse standpoint across all the breadth of manufacturing and professional services. Or they're, in a service van, out meeting customers, or they're in sales and they're out, doing CRM activities. What are those activities? What are those use cases, so that we can understand what it means to provide them the tools they need, as well as secure that experience for them. Really is going to start with that. So any workshop that we would do, if the first things we aren't asking are questions about your business, your success, we're certainly doing it wrong, in my opinion. From there, then comes the development of the technical vision. As you could probably hear, I'm pretty passionate about not leading with technology. Like it's not, hey, buy Microsoft 365 and then we'll figure it out. It's, let's figure out what we need and let the technical vision drive that conversation. So mapping the solutions that you need, as well as the services that you need to be successful with that, whether you're an organization that has a full IT team and you need some kind of additional Q&A support from time to time, but are pretty self-sufficient, or you're a lean IT, no IT organization that needs a complete managed services to make this turnkey for you. Kind of building some of those things out, building the technologies, understanding what the solutions are, understanding what it's going to mean to implement those, and connecting the dots from where you are to where you're going to be with the platform. Ultimately delivering that actionable plan. If we're going to deploy email, what does that email migration look like? If we want to get the autopilot with Intune, with Defender experience, let's do a proof of concept of that, and let's demonstrate what that looks like. And everything in between, from Teams to Teams Phone to business process automation with Power Platform, SharePoint, OneDrive, and throughout. So transitioning a little bit more from the high level, what I'm going to share now is just a series of common engagements. And again, just want to remind, these are kind of the check boxes on the menu. It's not all of them. There's a lot of kind of like, niche solutions within the Microsoft 365 space that we can discuss as well. But these are kind of the headliners that we see quite often, and ones that certainly there's motivation out in the world to be able to solve as a business, from both a business and a technology perspective. So the first one is all about identity. You heard me say a little bit earlier, like everything really starts with securing the identity. When we have cloud-based identities, we've extended, our security beyond the firewall of our data center, of our cloud, and now identity's out there. It's public, which means it requires more security. Big, huge castle walls, but things are in there are only as good as if the drawbridge isn't down and the gate's not open, right? So if someone can authenticate into an environment and impersonate a user, or can breach an environment through weak identity controls, then the best network security and perimeter defense isn't going to be good enough, because someone's been able to pass all the checks to get behind those walls and be able to access your information. So when we talk about identity and identity management, there's some very specific things that are just table stakes for any organization, and that we've actually seen, really starting about mid last year, people's like risk insurance and cybersecurity policies are now requiring these things before they renew them. And it's really, what we're going to talk about is Azure AD. How do we manage your cloud identity? How do we implement multi-factor authentication? How do we do single sign-on to make multi-factor authentication and your identity policies a lot easier on the user, so that we're bringing all the different identities people have into kind of a single choke point that we're going to ensure is secure. Has two benefits there. Obviously, single sign-on is a lot easier on the end user, because they authenticate once and then they can access all of the Microsoft or non-Microsoft solutions that you have in your environment that we integrate within that. Or the other benefit, obviously, is we get to apply security policies, and we don't have to worry about, Jason's authenticating to this application this way and authenticating to these 6 applications 6 other ways, and we have to have advanced security on all of those. Beyond that conversation really gets into some of the advanced things as well. Is, people hear multi-factor authentication and they think, oh man, they're going to prompt me for SMS or Windows Authenticator, or what have you, messages over and over and every time I log in. One of those is around developing a conditional access policy that really works for your end user experience and meets the security requirements that you need. So a lot of this conversation doesn't center around the basics of, yes, we need MFA, yes, we need single sign-on. It's, what do we need that for, and how do we make that as easy on the end user as possible? So scenarios like, if I'm in my office and I'm on an Intune managed device and my device is compliant and I'm coming from a known network, then probably don't need the prompt for MFA. But if I'm at home, maybe that's a known network and I meet some of those things, maybe we need to prompt periodically and cache that. But if I'm somewhere that I'm typically not, allowing the cloud to be intelligent and say, based on our risk assessment, Jason's on the East Coast, he's on the West Coast now. Let's go ahead and prompt for MFA there, just to make sure it's him, and he's accessing, getting things done on vacation or through business travel. How do we make that easy on the end user is a critical part of that conversation. And the good news is it only takes about an hour to have that conversation. Those answers pretty quickly. Probably takes about as long as it took me to state it there. The other one that's there, that's part of a good identity policy, is your mobile device management, right? So when we talk about conditional access, understanding that, am I coming from a managed device? Is that device encrypted? Does it have antivirus installed? Does it meet these certain requirements that we want a device to have so that it can authenticate? And then I can say, hey, if I go log in from somebody else's device, maybe we'll let people in, maybe we won't. Some organizations do, some don't, just depending on the security requirement. Maybe when I go from another device, I can only access these certain things, and I have to go through a stronger multi-factor authentication if I want to pick up my wife's laptop and start accessing things from that. Maybe there's different policies in how I can access and interact with information from an unknown, unmanaged device. We can get pretty granular with that, and the technologies that really drive that are Intune. That's the one that allows us to take all those things we've done with group policy or maybe SCCM in the past and apply those as cloud policies so that we don't have to worry about VPNs. Any device with an internet connection can get the policy applied and access the information that we need. So it helps us with distributing the information and standardizing across the board. For those organizations that kind of grew up with SCCM in their environment for server and endpoint management, we can create that co-management where today Intune and co-management or SCCM are working together, and you start to over time transfer those policies into Intune so that they can be cloud managed and they're less dependent on data center connectivity. The laptop that day one is up to date, but as soon as you hand it to the person, it never talks to a domain controller again. Those types of scenarios, we can start to eliminate those with cloud managed desktops. Autopilot, again, that's the capability to be able to say, I can pick up a device, authenticate with my company credentials to that Windows device, and then it goes out and says, okay, let's start the Intune enrollment process. Let's push down all the policies. Let's get the antivirus there. Let's make sure all the apps and updates are applied to it. And once that enrollment policy is complete, that is now a corporate managed device for those applications that we specified. And I'm able to do that without having to ship a device to IT or really what this device is, have them image them and then reship those back out to the end user. End users can get devices directly, authenticate, download all the information, get all the policies they want, and they're ready to go. Being able to manage mobile devices and understanding that experience is critical to modern security, because having that visibility into the devices to be able to drive consistency from updates, patch management, and all of those things, not just antivirus and malware protection to prevent threats, allows us to further secure the identity, as we were talking about with conditional access, and bring those two worlds together so that we can be confident that the devices people are using are protected, they're clean, they're up to date, the applications that are on them are on the latest updates, the devices themselves are not out of compliance from a old version of Windows that has vulnerabilities, those types of things, before we allow them to authenticate into the environment and access business data. Really, really works hand in hand. Again, that conversation's only about an hour, but that's scratching the surface of what that means from a use case. The implementation of that, we'll definitely want to go a little bit deeper with some plans, but certainly we can spend a good amount of time, because one of the things in this conversation is what applications that end users use and how do we interact with those. So Jesus will talk a lot more about identity, mobile device management, securing those threats, and endpoint protection. I talked a little bit about endpoint protection in the previous one. That's another one specifically. If you were in a room, I would say, raise a hand, get a prize if you can tell me everything that's in Microsoft Defender, and you can name all the products. We constantly get that the name changes, and we feel for you here that the name changes within this product suite have been a little confusing. They've changed a lot. But what is Microsoft Defender? What is the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint? What is Microsoft Defender for O365? Defender for Identity, and then the whole suite. That's what Microsoft Defender for O365 and Endpoint's about. Is it's all about that endpoint protection and security. So briefly, Defender for Endpoint, basically we're talking about antivirus, right? We're talking about how do we secure that? How do we protect it? How do we protect risks? For Office 365, we're talking about advanced threat protection. How do we scan emails, click links, do all the safe link, things like that to ensure emails don't have vulnerabilities in them beyond just, spam lists. And then for identity, we're talking about all the conditional access and the advanced controls of things like it's not just where you're accessing from, are you enrolled, but did the platform detect anomalous behavior? The most common example is impossible travel. If I authenticate from the East Coast, and then 10 minutes later I'm authenticating from Europe, that's a red flag, and we need to take additional steps for multi-factor, and then all the advanced things that AI can do to create a risk score for any authentication based on the patterns in which that user's authenticated over time, to detect anomalous behavior that might be a breach or a compromise, regardless of whether they have the correct password or not. All of those capabilities bring together into the Defender platform to create, all the way from your SaaS all the way to your endpoint capabilities to ensure that hopefully you don't get viruses on the endpoint. But if you do, we have protection there as well. So that's another conversation. And typically, as you can see, those checklists all kind of go under the security conversation. So that's some of the ones where you can check them all off. Yeah, we need to talk about all those. And we'll create a story and we'll kind of have those in aggregate of each other to create a great plan for how you can manage your endpoints and do security. Up next on the list is the broadest term in IT, in my opinion. Governance means something different to everybody else. Data loss prevention and compliance. Those are some loaded words, right? But generally, what we're talking about when we're talking about governance, I like to say is when we go in and you configure an environment, day one you have it the way you want it. Over time, it can drift. So good cloud governance, whether we're talking about Microsoft 365 or Azure, is a continual check that our cloud is as it should be, as we intended it to be. And what we're doing there is we're actually putting in limitations and controls to ensure that things can only be created in a way that matches the intent of our policy. With Microsoft 365, it's a little bit more simple, right? That we're talking about a set of SaaS-based solutions that are very focused on doing intended jobs. When we're talking Azure, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow, it's much more complicated, right? Like, how do we ensure that data is in a location where it's at, and how do we prevent people from coloring outside the lines? So how do we put the governance policies in place to ensure that our cloud is compliant? It's exactly like we want it, and that if somebody tries to do something on accident or on purpose outside of that, that they get challenged, and then it can either be a, hey, are you sure you want to do this, or a hard no. But then ongoing, we can look at the governance platforms that we have, look at it and see green check marks across the board that everything's in a good place using the intelligence that the cloud can provide us. Leads in good governance obviously leads into data loss prevention, right? What policies are we going to set about data exfiltration, external sharing, what information can be shared? Some of those things that are just like, yes, we allow this, no, we don't allow that, things that we've had for a long time, or advanced things around, identifying credit card numbers, patient information, maybe it's case numbers if you're in a legal firm, those types of things that are unique to your business that can get identified in email and prevented. So, like something along the lines of, if I send an email to an external audience that has a credit card number in it, and I accidentally, typed in, I was meaning to type John Barrar, but I accidentally auto-completed to John somebody else from this customer, the prevention of that information to being able to leave the organization. Those are the types of things that we're talking about, and ensuring that data is shared only with where it needs to be, and data is accessed only in scenarios that needs to be accessed. With that advanced intelligence on top of it, to be able to do some of that pattern matching and understand where information is. And then ultimately, if you have all this, beyond just saying we're compliant, one of the things I love about Microsoft 365 is it provides a lot of shared utility across, the millions and millions of users that are using it. And one of the ways that manifests are, ready-made compliance policies from the compliance center, where we can go in and say, we want to apply the PCI compliance template, but we're going to customize it a little bit from a governance standpoint so that we can use known templates to accelerate and consistently adopt great compliance policies, and then be able to inspect whether the information we have in our platforms are green with compliance, or if there's any risks around compliance. Where in the data center, you're using tools, great tools, by the way, like Varonis and things along those lines, to be able to bring together disparate systems and do all that in a okay way, but never really to the level that we can do it automatic with all these solutions that are designed to build together from a first party provider. That's another one we can talk about, and ensure that basically your SaaS organizations can, your SaaS applications can meet your organization's compliance, and we can make that somewhat turnkey, so that you have confidence that it's not just there day one, but ongoing, you have the ability to inspect as well as alerts on risks. Moving away from security conversations a little bit and some of that, that's the stuff we have to do. Like I said, everything starts with security. Now we get into the fun part, which is really talking to more about like modern collaboration. This is another 1 hour workshop that we can do, which is really discussing how Microsoft Teams help your organization be more collaborative, efficient, work together, wow the end user experience, do things like meetings. Um, these conversations really come down into how can the platform of Microsoft Teams consolidate multiple platforms typically within your organization and do so effectively with a way that your end user loves to have. This means a lot of different things. It could be, you're running a service center and there's some customer service component to it. You're, it could be that you're a sales organization and people are looking to chat. It could be basic things like we're having a meeting. And one of the great things I love about this meeting is that everything people are putting in the comments, every question, if we upload files to it, if we drop in notes and things along those lines, everybody with a Teams client perpetually has access to that meeting information for as long as we set from a rule standpoint to be able to go back and see that. So some of the things we talk about when collaborating is we see a difference in how people take notes. Some people open up the notes part on Teams meetings, start dropping in their notes, do that, then they share those notes out with the entire group or keep them private to themselves when done. And it's a great thing that says, hey, I just had 10 meetings in a day. What did we talk about yesterday? We all have those things. You can go back to the context of that meeting and look at the notes. Those are the intuitive things. Bringing things like this together into the Teams platform does beyond just a video conferencing solution or a phones platform that we're talking about with voice solutions. And how do we integrate those? It's those nice haves that all integrate that we see people start to intuitively adopt that really drives the success of a collaboration platform. So I challenge everybody not to think of it as, oh, Teams, it's chat and Zoom and things along those lines. It is, but it's also if you're using something like Microsoft To Do, and Microsoft To Do works with Outlook, it works with your task system. It's an ecosystem that's all designed and connected to be able to help you be more efficient, and put information where it needs to be. Um, but we can have some of those conversations about how your teams work, what they need to be successful, and we can narrow down like the thousand things that we can do. We haven't even talked about third-party app integrations into Teams, how we can narrow down those thousand things into the handful of things that can make your team successful and help you take what is probably 2 or 3 applications you're supporting and collapsing that down into one that will ultimately deliver a successful outcome that your end users will like. The other one that I like from an integration solution is voice. I've yet to meet anybody that loves their on-premises call manager, loves managing their voice system, loves the experience of managing phones throughout an enterprise organization or even a small business. Cloud-hosted voice that just works is made a lot of progress over the last decade, and ultimately it drives a lot of simplicity, but has costs associated with it. But looking at the long-term costs of really expensive call equipment, call queues, like all the different things, session border controllers, all the things that you need to be successful with call platforms, this helps simplify a lot of that. It helps drive that into a more of an operational cost and delivers the high availability of phones that you need. But one of the things beyond just providing dial tone to people that I love is the integration with the platforms and Teams. And I'll say I was always not a believer of kind of this, but I've been kind of driven to believe it. I was always someone that just operated off my mobile phone. I probably still do too much these days, but over time, my behavior became from, hey, let me just text that person A few people from Egroop are probably still laughing because I do still text people. It's like the real escalation button. And, but to chat on Teams and to put things into Teams, or even, if I'm driving down the road or I'm traveling, if someone calls my desk phone, there is no desk phone. It rings my mobile through the Teams app. It rings my laptop if I'm actively on my laptop and open. There's a consolidated experience where I have less devices, less complexity, and I can access information. I can access internal resources, internal chats, or eGroup. We have external chats. If you chat with me on my email address, that will come in to our teams, and we can chat directly with our clients. Which is a lot of people would say, "Oh, I don't want that," but I mean, I found it to be extremely effective to getting people quick answers and quick services. So voice solutions, bringing all this stuff together. Obviously there's the cloud hosted dial tone, call queues, and all those conversations we need to have to make sure that it's meeting the requirements you have from your phone systems. But ultimately, if we're focusing on the end user experience, it helps simplify that. And it also helps you reduce the amount of devices you manage as an organization. You can still have desk phones for those that want and need them because they do provide a certain experience. But for those that don't, you don't need them, and it reduces your complexity and reduces your cost by doing so. Webinar and live events. Hey, we're on a webinar today, so I don't really have to talk too much about this one. But the one thing I'll say is those that haven't fully adopted the Teams platform for this, there is a differentiation between meetings, webinars, and live events. It depends on the level of interaction and kind of the broadcast you're going to have to the audience. When you're talking about a live event, what you're talking about is there's going to be a presenter. Um, the audience can't see each other. They can only interact. They can send questions, but the questions are moderated before they get published for everybody to see. They can be responded to in private. They can be responded to in mass. But it's a much more controlled experience based on the information that goes out. It's much more broadcast. Whereas a webinar is in the middle ground. That's what we're on today, where we have a panel of presenters, but it acts more like a meeting so that the chat is a little more free flowing. People can talk amongst themselves. We can have more interaction. We can unmute people and have them speak if they have questions that you want to have live. We always love to be able to interact, kind of like we would in a in-person setting. We'll be able to have the ability to do that. And then certainly a meeting, that's where everybody in there that comes in is, has the ability to mute, unmute themselves and just interact as you would in a typical meeting. So using one of those three definitely fits the use cases that you need, whether you're doing a broadcast event to the all hands company meeting, or maybe it's a webinar that's expecting to have, 1,000+ people attend. You might want to go to a live event for that so that you can control that experience a little bit more. Or if there's some privacy concerns between, what people are sharing within the invite, some of those things are within the meeting, that'll happen. So has those capabilities. Those are built into the platform and available for you to use. Not a lot of people know the differences, but if you have any questions around those, we can talk about that and how you can make that happen. As you can see, that's a really quick discussion because you have it. So it's just a matter of how do you use it. There's not really like an engagement behind there to get those platforms rolled out. It's more of just communicating to the end users what capabilities they have and how to use them. Exchange Online and OneDrive, not a lot to talk about here. I think everybody understands Exchange Online, OneDrive. But one thing I'll touch on, and certainly John is going to touch much more as we get into OneDrive and SharePoint. He's going to touch on the depths of like when to use which one, what's the difference between personal file repositories. It's still business information, but what's the difference between that and what's departmental shares, when to map things to which, how to make them both effective from a file standpoint. When it comes to Exchange Online, OneDrive, SharePoint, kind of the basics core of a Microsoft or Office 365 implementation that we've had for almost a decade now, or a little bit over a decade. A lot of adoption's been happening. This is typically a conversation of how do we migrate from one to the other. So what we're seeing a lot in the space is organizations that are either being acquired, they're acquiring organizations, Maybe they're going from G Suite to Office 365. Maybe they're in specific fields like legal, financial that have gone through the security checks, and we've gone through some security workshops and are just now starting their cloud journey based on the security that we can put in place and to meet those requirements. Really is a It's a conversation of how do we get data from one place to the other? How do we do tenant to tenant consolidations, separations? How do we make sure email is secure throughout the entire email chain, all your MX records and all the hops the email goes through? It's really a conversation about that. And then when we talk about OneDrive, it's a conversation about how your end users are going to use files. It's not just give them their file repository and let them go. It's ensuring that they know all the capabilities, and it's a communications plan around how do they sync information, when should they sync information, those types of things that really drive the conversation between Exchange Online, OneDrive, and SharePoint. So most of those conversations today are either centered around files, which we'll talk about more in the later session, or they're talked about around migrations. But certainly any additional questions that anybody has around those platforms, that would be a good thing. We will comprehensively go over those details and make sure, again, we're starting with your business requirements, and then we're talking about the technology. We'll make sure we build a map that helps you be successful there, particularly as security is concerned. Power Platform's another one. Probably one of the most underutilized capabilities of this. What we're focusing on in this session is particularly around business process automation and low code to no code workflow solutions that we can ideally put in the hands of your end users or power users to be self-sufficient in building their own automations in their own systems, whether that's the HR manager or the finance manager, or on down the lines of business have needs where they want to be able to do things like, I want this form completed, I want this information to flow here, I want it to kind of go through this if then logic and then spit out the other side. Some of those things, all the way to Power BI and being able to report and mock up all of that information. Not yet talking about in this category specifically here, talking about the broader topic of kind of data and AI and building data models and things like that you would see with kind of advanced analytics and AI. That's another conversation. This one is more focused on enabling your end users to build in automations with low code, no code solutions that they can put in place and be able to just create efficiencies within their own groups, or in some cases, creating a centralized group for larger organizations, typically, that can provide this service back to the end user by building on top of the Power Platform for automation, as opposed to creating a lot of code solutions that age over time and are tough to support and upgrade from an end user perspective. And then this one I won't spend a lot of time on because we are going to have the deep dive, which is the modern file shares. And when we talk about modern file shares, what we're really talking about, from my perspective, is three things. How do we make your end users productive with documents they manage? How do we help you get information off of corporate file shares and things along those lines to meet two goals, which one is to eliminate the storage you need on premises or elsewhere that's costly, it ages, and always creates a challenge at refresh time. But also, how do we put it on a platform that natively has advanced mitigation from ransomware and some of those types of capabilities that are built in there, that we all know file shares are the number one breeding ground for ransomware. So how do we increase that just by moving the information to a better platform? So those types of conversations. And then there's a third leg of that, which we'll talk about a little bit more tomorrow, which is what do we do with that information that's not departmental shares, that's not file that end users are using, but maybe it's an application repository, maybe it's like imaging data if you're in healthcare, things along those lines. What are the possibilities in Azure to completely kind of take those use cases, put that information in systems that are designed to support them specifically, as opposed to the common breeding ground of ransomware that puts everything on there, and then we end up with a bunch of permission structures and things like that leave us open to vulnerabilities and threaten our ability to recover that important information if it was compromised. Really the core of that, and kind of One thing John will talk about is we want to have those conversations around, what is that information with your organization? How do we divvy that up so that we can build roadmaps specifically for how you can take advantage of these modern file shares and solutions and eliminate that cost of managing on-premises file storage going forward. Azure Virtual Desktop, also with the Microsoft Desktop, this is around, how do we provide VDI experiences without the overhead of things that we've done in the past, like Horizon View, Citrix, and I should say we've done in the past and we still do today. There's use cases for those on premises and within Azure. But with Azure Virtual Desktop, how can we deliver a great Windows 10, Windows 11 experience to end users from Azure data centers with all the tools that we have, with Intune management, the layering on policies and really bringing that experience up, for a variety of use cases. And those are typically, like, hey, how do I provide contractors access to my environment in a secure manner? How do I create desktop DR? If someone breaks their device and it's going to take me a little while to get to them, how can I provide them a temporary workspace that they can go through? How do I provide more secure access to the traditional VDI storage to my internal applications running in the cloud or on premises, and do so in an on-demand capacity so that I can reduce the costs required to manage infrastructure for VDI? And then ultimately, where we can get to these conversations, how can we do that easier, more effectively, without all the complexity that managing VDI on premises is typically brought forward? So really, any conversations around those virtual desktop, virtual experiences, how those can mix, whether it's applications or desktops, that's a conversation we can have. It starts with an hour, but as you know, that's going to get into applications and things along those lines, which should help us, which should create more conversations throughout and ultimately build a great end user experience where the desktop, application, the end user experience, whatever that use case, security, performance, scalability, all of those different check boxes can be met and can be done at a much less price point than traditional VDI has been able to be done in the past. And we do that through the combination of using, the Azure SKUs to our favor, where it's burstable compute and some of those types of things that allow us to drive down the compute costs as opposed to having a lot of resources idle most of the time to meet a worst case scenario during the 8 a.m. boot storm of people logging in. And then lastly on this one, the things that are here, this is always the warning I throw out there to every organization. If you're not backing up your Office 365 data, you need to be. It's part of, we're seeing the threats. There was recently a study that was put out that says 46.1% of business critical data lives in Office 365. Hard number to justify, but it's pretty specific. But it gets the point across that more business critical data is living in Office 365 than ever. Compromises of Office 365 environments are on the rise significantly. Whether it's getting malware, yes, you can get malware with your files and things like that in there. You can get that information encrypted. It does happen, and it can be compromised. It's still file data at the end of the day. Yes, sometimes an admin, they have too much access and they accidentally delete information that cannot be recovered by Microsoft because there is a way to hard delete information on accident across your environment that doesn't have a recycling bin or ability to recover it. That same thing can happen maliciously if an admin credential is compromised. It happens all the time in these environments, and the threat is growing. The good news is, and Microsoft states this in their terms of service, but a lot of people aren't aware of this. Microsoft actually puts in there, I think it was like 6.2b last time I checked. Microsoft recommends that you back up all Office 365 information with a third-party vendor, simply because the recycling bins and the replication of the information, all the multiple copies that exist, are not intended to be an immutable backup to be recovered rapidly in threat of attack. So if you have 1,000 users and you get an encryption event, yes, you have those recycling pins, but the reality of orchestrating like a rollback of that many users is not painless. It's actually pretty painful, and it's not consistent, because you have to kind of do that in a scripted manual manner, and it takes a long time. So the great news here is for about $2, maybe $4 tops user a month, per user per month, as well as covering things like your OneDrive and your file share repositories that may be in SharePoint. You know, kind of that, depending on if you have a ton in there versus a little, it's about $2 to $4 a user per month. You can add on third-party protection through Rubrik, and they will manage that storage for you and create that immutable copy. So therefore, what they do is they use the APIs to pull your information into their managed environment, which is hosted on Azure, and they secure that. So in the event of compromise of your environment, there is no way that that bad actor can also get into your recovery, because your admin credentials and things like that don't have access. They only have access to Polaris, the management platform that allows you to initiate the recovery of that information. So it's a completely immutable, separately managed copy that allows you to do that at a very effective price point. And when you're talking about things like M365, and you're talking about, you know, retail of $32, $54 a month per SKU, adding a couple dollars to $4 on that to have a second immutable copy of that information you know you can recover and is managed for a period of time, almost is a no-brainer. And the good news, the really good news about that, is it only takes a few hours to implement. So if there's a question, you don't have that backup, please reach out to us. We can tell you what that would look like. We can tell you how to get it implemented, and we can build those policies and get that backed up quickly. Those threats are on the rise. Okay, so with that, right about on time. Any questions? Jesus, I'm going to transfer it to you, but any questions from the audience that were in the chat? Anything anybody wants to throw out there before we take a quick 5-minute break and transition to the next?
Hey, Jason. We didn't necessarily have a question. We've had a few questions, but we've been answering them in the background. But we did have an ask that we may have to take and follow back up on later. Joshua was asking, you made a specific reference to a line in your Microsoft agreement, about the line in the Microsoft agreement. He's asking if we can share a copy of where that is.
Yes, let me go look up the MCA. I know, I want to say 6.2.b was where it was in that MCA, but that agreement gets updated all the time. So please don't quote me on that. I will go find that and provide that back out.
Great, thank you, thank you. But other than that, we have been able to answer the questions while you were talking, so.
Awesome. Well, thanks for everybody's attention. We'll be around for further questions in the chat as this Jesus and them go. So, Krista, I believe 10:10 now. Do we want to get started at 10:15 with Jesus, or?
Sure, that sounds good. We can start a little early, move things up so that maybe we can get everybody back to their day a little earlier today. So.
Awesome. Well, we'll be on break. Thanks, everybody.
And we will see everybody in 5 minutes. We'll be back here at 10:15. Joseph, thank you for joining. Yes, we're just on a quick 5-minute break right now. We'll be back in about 2 minutes for the next session. So. All right, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you had a chance to take that quick break. We're getting started with Jesus. Again, Jesus is our Director of Cloud and Managed Services here at Egroop and one of our technical specialists. So Jesus is going to be talking to us today about securing the end user experience against threats with Microsoft Security. And it looks like he's going to spend most of his time talking about Microsoft 365 Defender. So Jesus, the floor is yours.
Great. Excuse me. How's that audio there, Krista?
You are good to go, and we can see your presentation as well.
All right. Excellent. Well, good morning, everyone. Chris Krista mentioned, we will be talking about Microsoft 365 security today, the Microsoft 365 Defender suite, which you'll get a better understanding of as we get into it. We'll look a little bit, that's why the mostly comes into. We're going to talk about Windows 10 and some things in there as well. Notice here's my our topics as we go down. We're going to start with what Microsoft's deployed as they're called their Microsoft Security Reference Architecture. It's a very, very busy slide that I'll show you, but we'll go over it. It really shows where the pieces fit within an overall deployment. And we'll look at some different use cases too, where these Defender products sit in and where they go through. And then we're going to talk about some of these technologies very specifically as we go down here so that you'll understand what these are in the suite and what they actually do. And I'll talk about some implementation strategies and frameworks towards the end as well that'll help you in that rollout. So I'm Jesus Shelby, as Krista mentioned. I am the Director of Cloud Services here at Egroop. I've been with Egroop for a little over 9 years now. I have a pretty deep background on the Microsoft stack from the technology side. We definitely kind of grew up with the cloud as Microsoft was rolling out BPOS, which is what it was called before it went to Office 365 and the Azure as well. And I did come really from a DoD background with working with some security competencies over there prior to joining Egroop. So I've dealt with a lot of these same topics before across many, many legacy technologies as well. So this was the slide I was talking about, the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architecture. So this is publicly available. You can go out and you can grab this in the Microsoft Docs now, and you can have a look at it. And you can see what they've done is they really laid it out on where their security products fit in relationship to each other. Now, this has both the Microsoft 365 products that are in here, as well as covering some of that overlap with Azure for the entirety of the environment. So I'm going to highlight those here. So where we are in purple here is really what's covered in that Microsoft 365 stack. So where I've muted a bit right here in the middle, That you'll probably hear more about tomorrow with the Azure side of things. But do you know there's a lot of overlap in these technologies and the products that Microsoft has, right? They kind of work together hand in hand to secure your environment, holistically, not just on the SaaS side. We are looking at things if you're hosting it on the Azure side, but there's also hybrid technologies within all of these stacks that allow you to extend that security away from the cloud back to your, desktops or your traditional data centers as well. So they do scale well, and they are meant to give a more holistic coverage in what you're getting. So when you're looking around here at the slides, right, if we start in the upper right-hand corner, the software as a service, and you'll see we're calling out the Defender for Cloud Apps up here. That's plugging in to the identity layer, and that's Azure Active Directory, which we're going to talk about, which is kind of central to everything that you're doing. All your access controls and everything are actually happening there, right? And so when you use single sign-on and everything's running through there, you get a variety of different controls there. Jason mentioned some of those with conditional access, and we can actually split that out. It's not just about, do I get triggered for MFA or not, or is my device compliant or not? We can actually look at the apps that are in there and determine who should have access as well. And you can basically create scenarios where a user can access their M365 apps from everywhere, and that's fine. But maybe admins are going to be restricted in the admin portals, only coming from a known network on a known machine. So you can get very granular in that, and that's where that plugs into that SaaS platform up above. In addition, there's proxy services in there that allow us not just to do the point in time authentication where I get authenticated, I have a cookie, and I'm good for an hour or so till it re-triggers. But I also have some session-based controls where I can block things like downloads on demand as well, and that's where that cloud app fits into that story. We also see across here, from the identity, as you scroll around to the left, things like privileged access management, that is going to play in there. And again, that's how do you uplift the credentials. So if you have a non-admin account and you want to move that into an admin account, that's where that comes into play. You'll see some things for the endpoint device management here on the left as well. And then up in the upper left, it's more where it says security operations and SOC. So even if you don't have a security operations center, this is just the day-to-day management of the tools and what's happening within here, right? So it kind of consolidates all of those things in there. So that's really what the reference architecture is for. It's to show you how all these things play together and where they fit. So if we take a step back from that to see where that architecture really fits in the Microsoft guidance, and this you'll definitely talk about more tomorrow, is that cloud adoption framework. You'll notice how that sits at a tier higher. That's definitely a more holistic view in your deployment. While a lot of that information will be Azure focused, when it comes to identity and security, it's going to overlap with the M365 and your SaaS and your endpoint protection deployments as well. So it's a pretty comprehensive framework in there. And down here, we get a little more technical when we're talking about that reference architecture, because we are talking about tools and deployments and things over there. But the planning and execution part, of course, when we talk about zero trust isn't really a framework. It's more of a strategy. Privileged access, and as far as Azure Top 10, that more aligns with like Secure Score and some other things that we're going to talk about towards the end. But they sit a little more lower in the tactical levels of what we're getting into. So again, this is another view of the different products here on where they fit. Now, I like this slide just because it shows the different security products that are broken out and actually what they're doing and their purpose, right? Because we always talk about security, defense in depth, and the different layers that you have in there, but it's important to understand where they fit and what you get from there. So Defender for Office 365, that is going to be more around your email and your documents sharing. It's catching things as they come in, right? As they're shared and uploaded into OneDrive, as the email comes in, and we're protecting it from there, right? And I mean, you have an Outlook client, so that's where we move into Defender for Endpoint. That's on the device. We're protecting the device there. We're seeing user behaviors, application behaviors, and we're able to get those signals and pull those back, and orchestrate responses from that. And that flows in, of course, everything into this identity spot in Azure AD. Again, this is, if we've got your single sign-on there, your conditional access rules, your device attestation, all that stuff is actually happening in here. We're tracking what's happening, across different layers, and that includes your local domain controllers. This is, again, the hybrid capabilities that are introduced here with the Microsoft tools. And Then we have that Defender for Cloud Apps in there where we get, again, coverage into different apps outside of the Microsoft 365 suite and some of the proxy services. Where you see the Microsoft Sentinel line, so we're going to hit on Sentinel a little bit as well towards the end and where that fits. You'll notice that we are seeing more of the indicators here and where this crosses over with some of the insider risk management tools, because essentially this becomes a big data repository, and it's not just for your Microsoft 365 tools, right? You'll see a lot of the tooling here from the M365 and the Defender suite. It is very comprehensive inside of that portal. But if you need to correlate any of that data, or you need to enrich any of that data for things that are coming outside of the Microsoft 365 stack, this is where Sentinel helps you bring that together, right? So that's where you're going to drop other things, network logs, device logs, other app logs, perhaps that are not on single sign-on, workstation logs, and so forth. And you can bring all that data together. You can query against it. You can put that together with the other signals that you have and actually see what's happening in your environment. It's definitely a tool that's targeted towards those that are security practitioners for sure, but there's a lot of value in it, even if you're not running like a full SOC or have a full, full-time security engineer. Having that data available can actually help you go back, and if you have something that's triggered on it or you're compromised in any way, you can at least go back, look at some of those signals and see where they are across the environment and try to isolate it instead of having to go back, turn everything off, and just assume everything was caught. This will give you more of that idea of where things have actually spread. Okay, so now we're going to get into talking about technology a bit. And I do want to hit on Windows 10 and 11. We know Windows 11 is new. It's definitely coming out. If anybody's been following that, there's been a lot of people that are kind of upset around some of the requirements Microsoft has. There's a lot of legacy devices that don't meet their standard to be upgraded into Windows 11. So they are focusing on those things that meet their minimum security standard to run Windows 11. Now, that being said, Windows 10 actually can do basically the same security functions that Windows 11 can do. Windows 11, Microsoft's just taking the chance that they're going to enforce some things in there, like the TPM chip that's required, the TPM 2.0. There's some virtualization security that you have to be able to meet to run it, as well as modern processors so that they can handle the load for the work that it's doing. So all that being said, if you're running Windows 10 today, again, Windows 10's out there till 2025. You have access to these tools as well that can be turned on. So I'm gonna walk down some of the key items here. There's actually a ton more that's built into the platform from a security perspective. Some of these you might be familiar with, you might be using today. Some maybe not as well known, but of course, BitLocker is securing the device. BitLocker does work on your native storage, your internal storage, so your operating system, app volumes, those type of things, of course. But you can extend that as well to external storage. So when you're plugging in an SSD or a USB key, you can actually have policies out there that enforce encryption on those keys as well, so that you can actually control the encryption on those devices in your environment. Defender Smart Screen, that is most recognized as something that was used to be tied to Internet Explorer, and now we have the new Edge-based programming where it's in there. And essentially, that's you go out to a browser. Microsoft keeps a list of who's out there. You turn it on, it's on the list. You're going to get this nice pop-up. It says, hey, this is potentially a site with phishing or malicious malware, and attempts to save you from hitting those, and especially users. The Defender antivirus that's built into it, the platform here. This is worth mentioning. Just because I know Microsoft's gotten a bad rap when they first released it with its performance that's out there, but they generally score very, very high in third-party tests now. So it is a very capable anti-malware engine to have on your device from that perspective, right? I mean, it doesn't have all the other integrations that you might have from a third party, on its own. We're going to talk about the EDR and how that complements that here, but if you're just running it home, Windows Pro, or you don't go with the EDR, it is a very, very capable antivirus engine, and routinely is setting up scores here. The one here, this was the last one, I believe, from December, the last check that the AV tests did. They're a third-party independent verifier of it. They basically run it through. They have these samples. They put malware on devices. They see how things get caught. Microsoft kind of scored all 6s across the board, which is their highest scoring, and they've been doing that now for quite a while. So I would say, if you're running that, you should have confidence in what's running on the platform. So Windows Hello, that's another piece there. So Windows Hello, most people right now experience that around when you first start up Windows 10 or 11, it's entering your PIN and protecting your password. So that still is what Microsoft considers two-factor, because you have to know the PIN and you have to have your device um, in there. And it is a little better than just having your password. So if something is on the machine or capturing passwords, for instance, that password's more or less protected, attached with the TPM, and you have that PIN that's used instead of the password. And that PIN is only available on that device. So that's kind of where they go that route. Now, in addition to the PIN, if you have biometrics on your machine, fingerprint reader, or if it does, it has a Windows Hello camera on it, you can do facial recognition. You can add those in there. And then we have the FIDO2 keys. So if you're familiar with, FIDO keys like YubiKey, I think Google has one as well. Those are also supported now for logging directly into, say, a Windows desktop through Windows Hello. There's, additional things in there, certificate authentication and things like that. There's a variety of options in there. Now, you can block out different authentication mechanisms on Windows, just so that you know. By default, if you enable, let's say we'll have the PIN, you'll also notice if you've seen this, there's an option to hit the pad, you'll get the password, so you can use either if for some reason you can't use your PIN. If you enable the biometrics, that's going to be on there as well. So if that fails, you can drop back to a PIN or a password. But you can actually restrict those. So you could take away that password option as well. This goes more down to a much bigger strategy when you start talking about passwordless authentication, but you could certainly do that so that that password itself is not exposed. And when you use Windows Hello for Business and you've set that up internally, actually that can be used for logging a user in without getting their password. They can get to Office 365, which supports this because your device is going to support the token needed for that. You also could talk to local authentication, so like a file share, right, or any type of internal application that might normally use NTLM or Kerberos authentication there. You can set that up in a way that that user can still access those shares without being prompted for a password. So it's very, very, very powerful and super convenient to use. I can't, it's very rare that I use a password nowadays on my machine. So App Control, App Locker, again, in the box, this is for Microsoft. This is their whitelisting engines. They both handle it a little bit different. App Control is the newer one. App Locker's been around for a little while. App Control is device-based, which means anybody that logs onto the device, admin or user, regardless. Whereas with App Locker, you can actually target different rules of different users. So they're both applicable depending on your current needs. And when you're trying to stop malware and ransomware and things like that, the whitelisting can be a little bit of overhead and management, but it certainly makes it very, very difficult to run things that you haven't approved. So something that was new in Windows 10 is exploit card. I'm sorry.
Hey, there was a question on that specific topic. Thought you might want to take a moment. Jerry's asking, how can we leverage app whitelisting in Windows 10? Assume this is a Microsoft 365 feature.
This is not. So these that's an awesome thing to point out. What I'm covering here are based on Windows 10 and 11. Some of these will vary based on your licensing level and how it gets implemented, whether you have Pro or Enterprise. So if you have Enterprise rolled out, you can actually use group policy. You can use SCCM or Intune to push out these policies, but you'll have access to these. If you have Pro, you can do App Locker. There is some considerations in there in how that goes out. You don't necessarily, I'm trying to recall, I don't think you get the group policy access, but you can use registry-based deployments. So it is available to everyone who's running Pro or Enterprise. And again, that's Windows 10 or 11 today. Not at all related with Office 365, though the M365 components that we'll talk about might make it a little easier to kind of manage and push some of these out. So excellent. Where I was talking, exploit guard. This one here, exploit guard. I will tell you, if you do a lot of lookup on here, Microsoft will pin some of these into some of the more advanced, like Endpoint, Defender for Endpoint. They will associate a lot of these, but it actually is another workstation feature that is available on your Pro and your Windows 11 devices. So exploit guard is really an evolution of another product we used to deploy called Emmet. Emmet used to be what we would deploy on Windows XP, Windows 8, for those that actually rolled that one out. and it added some additional security capabilities in there. And what they did is they baked that into Windows 10. So you get a few more things that are in here. So network protection that you turn on actually leverages Defender's Smart Screen, but instead of just being tied to the browser, it's like you would expect here with the name, is it's tied to network behaviors. So if I'm downloading a file or working through another system in the network stack, it can still be verified with Defender's Smart Screen. It will tell you, hey, that file you just downloaded, it's not, hasn't been signed, it's not safe, and it can kind of clue you into some of those things and protect users from executing things that you don't want there. Attack surface reduction. Now, there's a lot that goes into this. Essentially, this is where you get some defaults where it closes down some behaviors on how things interact on your systems. It disables some things that are related to Office in the system, like some of the JavaScript, VBScript, and those type of things that run behind the scenes, typically on a Windows machine. And really shuts those down. And those policies can be customized further to further lock down activities there. And controlled file access. So this is, you already have your admin access. You go to your program files, your system files, and those type of things that are typically protected from a normal non-elevated user. But controlled file access really secures that and moves that into the user space a bit, where you have your your hidden folders, your app folders, and those type of things, which sometimes malware will use those because those are in the user space. They are able to deploy under a user context and still go in and not only just take a a malicious action on the user itself, but they can look for elevation of of privileges on what else is running on the account and so forth. And that helps reduce the surface there as well by locking down some of what's allowed to run from those directories. So again, all of those things on the left here, outside of any Microsoft 365 subscription at present, if you're running Pro or Enterprise, you will have various levels of ability to manage these. Like I said, through registry, group policy, existing SCCM type of deployments. Now, the things here on the right that are related. Now, I put virtualization-based security out here because these are this is the really big thing here, and this is what drives a lot of the requirements for Windows 11 that's moving down. And the credential guard, if you've done anything with the Microsoft like credential cache and you've had to clear that in the past, that really runs in the user space. And if you had access to any type of user account that's logged in, something gets compromised, it might have access to other accounts and keys that were saved within that. This creates a virtual machine essentially that runs it, and it has to go through a broker. So if you have a compromised like device driver or something like that, today without that, you potentially might be at risk there of those credentials being leaked. With this being virtualized, it's harder to do that. No drivers have access to that virtual space. None of them can get in there. Device guard is really the same thing. It's about secure execution code on Microsoft. It's making sure that the Windows files aren't compromised when they're spun up and they meet their standard. Application guard and Windows Sandbox. These are probably two that are the least known at present. Application guard you can utilize now with the Microsoft Edge browser, and there are actually plugins that work with Chrome and like Firefox that allow you to access as well, but it's essentially a sandbox browser. And you can have policies that say, okay, these are my internal sites, they're safe, you're going to open a normal browser instance, but everything else is going to default to this application guard instance, which is a sandbox environment, which you can set policies on to say, I can't download anything out of that sandbox environment. So it kind of protects that browser experience. Now, there is a portion of this that does require Microsoft 365 licensing and some of the higher licensing, and that's where it extends the application guard into the Microsoft Office applications. It actually can have virtualized instances of those applications as well. So securing against like macro attacks and things like that can be possible where, if I have an untrusted worksheet that I've downloaded, you can force that into that environment. And then the other one is Windows Sandbox. So that one is a virtual instance that's just you spin it up. It's a virtual desktop. It's always the same. So, whatever you work in there, save. It's great for admins because you can test something. You want to browse to a link or try a file. You can do it in there. When you shut it off, it kind of wipes it down. And I'll show you those two really quick before we move on and we talk about VDI. Let's see if I can scan that over. Yep. So if we run down here in this browser instance, you'll see I already have this turned on. If I say new application guard window, it's going to spin up. It does take a minute the first time you spin it up. So you'll see a little window. Usually I've already had this up before, but this right here is a separate instance, right? It looks like it's the same. Users can't tell the difference. If I go to downloads here, you'll notice there's a couple files in here for Chrome. But if I go, oh, I didn't mean to start Teams here. Here, and if we look under our users, you're going to see I have a few different users that are in here currently. But if I look at this folder, notice it's this user account here. It's kind of separated. This doesn't exist here in my normal file system, right? It's been virtualized away. It's not interacting kind of with my own file system. Now, this one is not really locked down. I actually can move files back and forth, but I could have this locked down where I couldn't have downloads coming out into my normal environment. So that's Application Guard, and it's easy as that. And if you download the extension, like I said, with Chrome, it adds a little button to open that up as well. And then you can drive those with policies as far as what's allowed. Now, the Virtual Sandbox, if you turn this on, it's a Windows feature. Then go to the store, you download Windows Virtual Desktop. We'll give you this icon. You click it here, you'll get a spin up of a machine here that starts up, and it's your desktop environment, just like this. So anything I do here in this space is restricted to this space. And, again, this environment can be open more or less. If you have admins, you want to paste in and out, that's okay. But if you wanted to lock it down with secure policies, you could do that and restrict interactions with the host desktop. And when you close it, you'll get this little message. It basically tells you it's going to wipe anything out. Anything you've saved, any files, any setup, these are going to be removed. So that's those features there. So with your VDI experience on Azure Virtual Desktops, I'm going to change my context. Oh, there we go. So Azure Virtual Desktop here, again, this is very relevant when we're talking about Windows 10 and 11, because when you go out with Azure Virtual Desktop, depending on your SKUs, you already have the rights to actually run a Windows 10 desktop. So we're not talking like if you're familiar with our traditional remote desktop setups with Windows Server, Windows 2016, and kind of running the desktop experience. These are actually Windows 10 multi-session desktops here that you can run, and you have licenses to run those. So you don't need a separate license, any type of RDS cal or anything like that for access into there. It's all part of the, whether it's M365, say Business Premium, or like the E5 SKUs, you'll get those accesses into there. And with Azure Virtual Desktop, and you might have heard Windows 365, which is built on Azure Virtual Desktop technologies, essentially Microsoft goes and they have abstracted away all the normal things we would have to deploy, all the licensing servers, gateway servers, brokers. That's what these are. Normally, you would deploy a host of servers for that. And that's abstracted away to a management plane that you have control over, that you can still manage the sessions and things that you typically would do with an RDS deployment. But you only have to really deploy and worry about the desktop, right? So the VDI desktops. You might have your gold image or your sessions that roll out there, and you can scale those on demand. There's a lot of different technologies in there that keep track of that. As far as like you have to spin up new ones or spin them down to control costs. You might have dedicated desktops for folks that are always on the same desktop, so they're managed just like a personal VDI or a personal laptop would be, or the multi-session host, like I said, 10 people can be on one machine, right? So you get those cost of scales. This is still deployable with remote app or the desktops. You have the clients on your Windows 10 machine. So when you have a user that gets into these workspaces, they can have different desktops that are published, different remote apps that are available to them, and they can work through there. So this complements some of what we're going to talk about with the rest of these other tools out here, in the fact when you're talking about secure scenarios, BYOD, remote folks, there are certain situations where you might want to allow someone to get on, but you cannot manage that endpoint. Vendors or contractors like us is a prime example, right? So if I'm already rolled, I have my desktop managed, you're not going to be able to have me enroll my desktop unless you actually give me one that's managed and enrolled. It's just, you can't have multiple management endpoints and stuff that are controlling the same device. So other than getting the hardware, you would set up like a VDI instance that you could get into. And, like I said, you'd be covered with your licenses there. We have the Windows 10 Enterprise. You log in, it can be secured and managed through the normal endpoint management tools. Okay, so now we're going to get into the Defender stacks, and I'm going to start rolling through this. And because we've been talking about the endpoints with Windows 10, I'm going to start here with the Defender for Endpoint. Now, the Windows Defender antivirus, anti-malware agent, That's on Windows 10 boxes. Is like I said, a fine agent, but you also have to look at, centralized, management of those. So there's two plans with Defender of Endpoint. Plan 1 will essentially give you that dashboard. So those of you that have worked with it before have probably been like, hey, I need semantic because I need to be able to see it all in one spot. I need to see who's not updating their definitions, who's out of date. Well, that's what Plan 1 really is. So when you have that in place, you can get that centralized view of just what's happening with that Defender antivirus, and you can set up policies around there that are just for that. Now, if you go up to Plan 2, this is the more feature-rich product that Microsoft has, and this is what their EDR or enhanced, endpoint detection response solution is, because it's more than just the centralized view of that. That's really the things that we're talking about more on the right, encompassing that. And the threat and vulnerability management dashboards opened up to you. So in Office 365, you can basically see all of these signals that are coming in across your devices. You can query against different things. If you're familiar with SIMs, and we'll talk about Sentinel a little bit later, it works somewhat like that. You have access to those data sets, but again, it's contextualized to the Defender, for Endpoint and the Defender products. We have, the attack surface reduction. So we talked about that, how that's built into the Windows 10 platform, but you do get some centralized reporting and control over this. So it's, like I said, with the M365 parts of this that you can deploy, it might ease some of the administration burden on those things. The other thing when we talk about the anti-malware client now is we also get access not just to the Windows 10, right? So if you're running that Plan 2 and you have these things plugged into it, you can deploy that agent on Mac OS, Android, and iOS. So you can actually get coverage across all of those and get reporting across all of those different platforms now from this, Microsoft security add-on here. And automation. So automation is going to be key in all of these higher tier packages that they have. Essentially, anything you can alert on, anything you can bring in here, any of the places where we have data points, you can tie it into the automation engines behind M365. Now, most of them will leverage a form of integration into another product that's called Logic Apps. They have different management interfaces into that, but it lets you create an activity flow around what you want to happen. And that could be taking those alerts and maybe sending those alerts to another management platform. If you collect tickets or anything like that, you could certainly do that and set those up, or have them maybe spring in Teams or Jira or anything else that you're using from that standpoint. You could have those go into another security database if you have an actual security team that's managing something like that. But you can also have it reach back, and based on the connectors that you're using, so like Defender for Endpoint, for instance, can reach back and isolate a client from the network. If it detects something in there, it can go, and because it's installed locally, it can actually shut down, ports on that device and isolate what it's doing. So there's a lot of power built into that. So Endpoint Manager. So Microsoft's Endpoint Management solution is really two different solutions. Those of you that have been around for a while in this space will have heard of System Center Configuration Manager, right? So a pretty popular product that's used for managing images, updates, and even certain forms of configuration outside of maybe group policy. So the Endpoint Manager suite here is really the inclusion of that now, as well as Microsoft Intune for that cloud-based management console. Now, high level, where you would use both of these, to be quite honest, is around your server management and your workstation management. Your SCCM is going to still be there for helping to manage servers. Now, some of that workload, if you're running in Azure, can be abstracted by some of the Azure tools for sure. But if you're in a hybrid environment, you might have SCCM running across that. And if you've already have SCCM, of course, you can continue to utilize that, and you can layer in your Intune console, which will then allow you to start migrating some of those workloads and management tasks out to Microsoft Intune. We can also deploy an Azure instance of SCCM as well to help with that transition. So it makes it easy to move from one to the other. Typically, if you don't have a large deployment, even if you have SCCM, it might still be relevant for servers. Like I said, leave that in place, but then maybe move everything to Intune if you're just using it to, say, manage and report on updates. If you have a lot of application deployments, if you have some other type of runbooks and things that you're pushing out or scripts that you've already packaged in SCCM, then it might work to have that run in tandem with Intune, where Intune maybe that takes over the update management, but some of these other functions that SCCM has can continue to be done and exercised on that SCCM deployment. And you would have that from, like I said, deploying this Azure instance so that you don't have to put a server in the DMZ or anything like that. So they work together across that to, holistically manage those devices. They have very close to one-to-one functionality when it comes to the management of devices in terms of coverage. So yes, you can do your updates. You have your Windows updates. You can do some third-party updates. Now, this is the one thing that Microsoft has always and continues to lack a little bit. But you can plug that in with a third-party provider like Apache My PC that basically gives you pre-packaged deployments for SCCM and Intune that covers a wide catalog of third-party updates. And they support that. But you can also do your own if you're managing that. It's just a matter of taking them, packaging them up, throw them on the Intune console, and pushing them out. You can push scripts out through these applications here and send those out to your machines. And Intune, it's worth noting as well that because of the MDM hooks that we can do scripts both from the Windows standpoint, but also from Mac OS, right? Mac OS supports it. There's some configurations that you want to do through there. So it does support multiple platforms there. And you'll see it's on the screen where it's highlighted here, the devices. So the one thing that you may or may not have noticed in here is that Chrome is not, or Chromebooks are not on here. So there is not a support model for Chromebooks today, and at least currently it's not on the roadmap. So that's the only major OS that's missing from this management ecosystem today. So other things that we can rely on with Intune when we look into how people access machines is we know who the user is. We can check their users with MFA and, okay, they passed that, but now what device are they coming from? So we can really look at that from two different standpoints from staying in the Microsoft ecosystem, and that's, is the device compliant with policies, which is really going to rely on Intune being there and Intune hosting your policies because it will evaluate the endpoint from that. And then it will tell you if you have a pass or a fail, and you can create some conditions on that that allow or block access or restrict access. The other one is it can tell if you have a hybrid machine. So that's a machine that's enrolled with Intune, but is also managed by group policy. So this is just going to look at it, and it's going to say, hey, I know this is a recent device. I still see it. It's actively managed. So I'm going to trust that device. That is a little less secure than the active attestation you get with the Intune and the Intune policies. At that time, it's looking at the policies and you're going to pass or fail based on that granularity. Whereas with the hybrid scenario, you're really just trusting that the policies are in place. They're managed separately from Intune, and it's just saying, hey, it's not a unmanaged machine at that point. So that's where that power really comes in there with the endpoint manager pieces. This also works across the different VDI scenarios. Now, Intune, typically from the workstation standpoint, if you have a Windows 10 machine in VDI, you can use Windows Intune. And in fact, the Windows 365 desktops are actually deployed from the endpoint management screen. You set up policies and Intunes, and it goes out there because those are personal desktops. So basically one desktop per user. Currently, you cannot use this with the multi-session host. Microsoft still is working on that. That is on their roadmap. But right now those would be managed separately and typically through a traditional group policy because those things are still domain joined. When you deploy a VDI instance, you'll have that directory backed configuration options there. All right, here's your identity layer, right? Your Azure Active Directory. So as you can see, the graphic here kind of shows the different flows that you have coming in that you really have to think about here with Azure Active Directory. At the top, the privileged access is just what it means. It's those coming in with anything more than user rights. If you have rights to manage really anything with elevated rights within the environment, you're going to have some type of privileged access flow that has to be secured, managed, and monitored. So you also, towards the bottom, you have your user access, right? The non-privileged users that are still logging in, they're still accessing company data or applications and so forth. So you want them to come in and be evaluated as well. And then your management plane really in here is kind of the conditional access and what we're evaluating. This is where we can separate things out. If you're Office 365, yeah, it's company data. I probably want you on a managed device, and I want you to come in and you have to be triggered with MFA at least once. But then if I have a Azure management plane, for instance, or a CRM with personal data and my HR manager is logging in there, I might only want them coming in from maybe a specific network or from a secure laptop that I have that's maybe a little more stringent in types of controls that I have and policies that are in place. So these are the things that we would normally think through when we're developing that access strategy and what's in there. Core to that management plane, though, is the single sign-on, right? So modern applications today, if you have them in there, you're going to federate those logins so that you can see those and you can capture those and see what people are logging into and what that is, what their normal behavior is. So there is some behavior analysis that goes on at this level as well. So you have some identity risk management and things that are happening here in the cloud. There are ways we're going to talk about how to extend that into your local Active Directory domain controllers as well, coming up here. But this lets us know, if I'm logging into, AWS separately because I'm running multi-cloud instance, right? That then has to be managed separately, or I have to somehow either manage that or pull that data in and go evaluate that separate from everything else. And I have different access rules. Whereas if I federate it, it comes in, I go to my Azure AD, I do my sign in, I have my MFA, and then I'm allowed into the application. And we can track that, right? And when I revoke access or I offboard a user, I can kill that. I can kill all their session tokens, I can remove access, and that helps us stop that access into all of those applications. So it makes onboarding and offboarding a little easier. There are also some abilities to talk to applications that help with user provisioning. So when we talk about that, of course, the user has to be here in Azure AD so that we know that they can log in. But typically that has to have a matching account or a reference account in the application that's under single sign-on as well. And there's a protocol called SCIM, which is a standard protocol that you can use. It basically says this is what a user looks like or a group looks like, and Azure can kind of send that over and say, yes, can you create this for me? And it will ingest it and it will run through that and apply that and create the user. And then when you offboard a user, it can also do that and remove them as well. So we're still not seeing a ton of application support SCIM as of yet, but a few do. The more that come on board, the easier that will be. And for those that don't, it is possible to look into building essentially like a shims or something to help with that. So we talked about the multi-factor authentication and maybe the FIDO, the UB keys. That kind of falls under what passwordless is. So the passwordless ecosystem here from the Microsoft side is actually getting pretty strong. If you haven't tried it out of the box, you can turn it on. If you onboard your authenticator for your MFA, you set up your push notifications. You can then, if it's enabled on the tenant, you can opt into passwordless authentication. What this does is it essentially will prompt you on the screen when you log in, and it will give you a number. You'll go onto your device, you'll find the matching number and plug it in. So instead of putting in a password, a PIN, or a rotating code, you're just going to match that up on the device. And that will then let you in, so you don't actually have to use your password. And that does support technology behind the scenes that's actually supported with the FIDO standard, FIDO 2 standard, that is supported with like Safari, Chrome, and Edge browsers. And so that will also pass through those keys with M365. If you're using a Windows device, you can actually integrate this as well, and then it kind of flows all the way through, and it really gets you that. Not only a great experience from the user, but it protects against things like credential theft, right? Even if you have keyloggers, they're not going to be able to capture those type of things that are going in there. Your privileged identity management. So we talked about privileged access right here at the top of this flow. That is what allows you to remove privileged roles in your environment from a standard account. Now, what that means is if I log in with my non-privileged account, I'm not going to have any access to do anything. I can't create users, groups, or anything like that, but I can opt in and elevate into that. And I have different ways of controlling that method. I can require MFA at this point, so I can make you enter MFA again to prove who you are to go up. I can require you give me a reason. I can restrict how long those sessions are, an hour or two. I can place in there that it has to be approved by someone. So it could be automatic if I'm a daily administrator internally, but if I need it to be approved for an external contractor, I could add it so that it goes to my security team and somebody actually has to push a button and said, yes, give them access for that. And then they'll be uplifted into those roles. So essentially, those roles are added on the fly to their account. The refresh happens, and then they're in and they're able to execute on tasks from that standpoint. So it's just another level of protecting access. So even if the account is compromised, there are steps in there before they even have access to those roles where they still can't actually do anything. And another big thing I think is often overlooked is how it handles external identities. So if you interact a lot with other people outside of your organization and you want them to collaborate on content, whether it's in SharePoint, Teams, or any of these other tools, this is already built into the system. It's here, right? It will handle those external identities. You can add a user that's external. You can have that account is what's called a guest account or a B2B account, and you can bring them in. They don't require licensing because it's based on your internal licensing, and they can interact with your productivity tools. You can even have those with some privileged administration on there too, if that was required. And you don't have to build anything into that. If you guys have managed these externally at all, or anybody's dealt with some of the external LDAP servers, Atom on the AD side, or dealing with SharePoint and Federation locally on premises over the years, you'll know what a pain that actually is. And so having this available is extremely beneficial. And again, it's all centralized too. It's centralized logging. You can tell what folks are doing. You remove that guest account, all their access is removed all at the same time. So building on the Active Directory in your client identity, you have Defender for identity. This is what extends all the same behavioral analysis things that we have in the cloud and gives those to you locally from your traditional domain deployments, right? There are some other things in there when we talk about password write-back, password resets that work outside of this that help with that integration. But this really gets all of these data points that I have here on the screen. It puts that in the cloud, so it's evaluated with a very similar engine that's happening in Azure AD. So, the user behavior, the analytics, it's all going in there. The lateral movement, what's happening in an environment, that's all tracked and it's alerted, and then there are reports given to you so that you can take action on that. Now, when you first turn this on, it takes at least 30 days usually to collect the data to start understanding what's going on, and really about 60 before it starts getting a hang of what the normal behavior is. But it will start looking at that when you're like, you log on to one machine every day or one server from an admin perspective. Maybe they just manage the Exchange server. And they've been doing that for 6 months, but then all of a sudden they're logging on to SharePoint servers, file servers, and they start, it's things that are outside of normal behavior. These type of things start to get flagged by the machine learning AI algorithms, and they bring it to your attention. So Defender for Office 365. This one, outside of identity, is really where we saw on the architecture, where it sits up in kind of at the front of the stack. It's protecting things that are coming into the environment. And while I have this here and it kind of shows the ramp with Exchange Online Protection, the majority of the tools here are focused on email, but it does actually have some coverage in OneDrive and SharePoint around the documents as well. But the big ones typically that we're going for are safe attachments and safe links right here at the top. So safe attachments are something like a detonation chamber. Anybody familiar with Proofpoint, Miracast will know that these capabilities are out there on some of these third-party products as well. But essentially, if I send you a Word document, it will look at that document there, open it up and see if it's wrong or malicious, or if it wants to send it through. Of course, if it is, if it flags it, it won't send it out. And safe links will rewrite all of your links, so you get time of click protection, right? So it's a rewritten link that it'll hit the Microsoft service at the time a user clicks it, and then they'll look. That protects against like malware campaigns where they send it out, the other end of that link is actually going to be clean. It's not going to be pointed to anything, but a couple days later they switch it out with the malware site or something, understanding that somebody might come back and read the email late or just go through it. They're playing kind of a numbers game there, right? And then you click it at that point, you could be infected or compromised. So this is a mitigation against that because it actually checks that link at the time that you click it. One special note here with safe attachments, when comparing it to other services, by the way, is there are some options. You can delay the email until the attachment's completely checked, but you can also send it through. So where the message goes through and the attachment, it's actually just a notice there, and it says, hey, this is being scanned, and when it's done, it's going to be injected back into that original email. So you can still get the message, you have to wait on the attachment. And now what they have just rolled out is actually an evolution of that where you can get a preview of the attachment. So when you click on it, you don't have access, you can't download it yet, but you can preview it in a safe environment. So essentially think of that almost like access into a window into a virtual machine that it's going to open up, and you could see that PDF, Word document, or whatever, and have a look at that content before it's actually delivered. So it can be extremely helpful from that side of things. The other one in here, Office 365, when you add this in here, is the Threat Hunting Explorer. Again, with the other Defender products that you add in here that make up the entire Defender suite, it gives you that ability. Essentially, these data sets now become available for you to query against, and you can go in and look at data from there. So even, again, if you're not running a SOC, you could run indicators of compromise that Microsoft publishes, and you can go in and look at that, and you can tie this into automation and so forth as well. Okay, so that's really the main Defender suite. So when we talk about Defender 365, it's those Defender products, right? Now, there is an extension of that with Azure Sentinel, and this is what we start to call the XDR platform. So that's the extended detection and response. Now, if you're only worried about M365, the Defender options there for the automation, all of your tracking, your auditing, alerting is going to be very similar to what you can get here in Sentinel, except for with Sentinel, we get a little more control over how long that data is retained. We can retain that longer, and we can also start to integrate other sources of that information. So, once we move beyond M365, there might be other things that we want to get from servers that are running directly in Azure, or maybe they're Linux servers, maybe they're network devices from firewalls, the switches, APs, and so forth. You might have other VPN solutions where you want that data to come in and be collected. You can pull all that into Sentinel, right? So that's where it gets its kind of that SIM moniker, right? And you'll see here, SIM, if you're not familiar with SIM, basically that's what it is. It's just a collection of all of your security information. And it has some basic rules that it's set up to automate and run against. So these runbooks that you can run already look for some common things that might be triggers to be on the lookout for. So on a traditional server, for instance, it might be looking for lateral movement of something that's happening with accounts or accesses and processes. From when they come in, whether it's email directly on the workstation, some type of network intrusion, it will look to correlate some of those. When there's an event, so Log4j, for instance, that came out, you can actually run and query against some of that. If the data is collected here in Sentinel, for instance, it can look for indicators there of where that Log4j risk might live, so that you can actually go mitigate that. Now, the other part of Azure Sentinel, just like with the Defender products, is you can tie this in to automation. So essentially, any of the data that you come in with, whether you're using a default playbook or just a raw alert, once you have that established, you can actually trigger that into an automation. And that automation can essentially do almost anything you want. At this point, you can talk to, let's say, a Cisco ASA. So you have that out on your network, you've detected some type of information intrusion, regardless of where it is, it's coming up on the alert. You can automate that and have that ASA block that, that port or that access. So that's available. Actually, that's one of the connectors that are in there. There's a ton of connectors that Microsoft already has. It talks to a variety of technologies, including all of the Microsoft ones and a lot of non. But you can also build custom connectors. So whether you have a dev team or you need to outsource that, if that box has a method for interacting with it remotely, that can really be configured into a custom connector as well. If it has an API, that's more direct. If not, if it's something like SSH, you can run that through something like an Azure function or something to go there. But you essentially have access to control and mitigate your entire environment through Azure Sentinel. Okay, now what we're going to move into is really talking about all these things and deciding how do I deploy it. Now, I'm going to start here with what Microsoft proposed as their Zero Trust Rapid Modernization Plan. Now, when I talk about Zero Trust here, I think it's important to know that Zero Trust isn't really a framework. It's not like a compliance framework. It's not a standard plan that you're going to follow ABC completely, because every environment's going to be a little different. You have legacy applications and things like that you have to worry about. So it's more of a strategy. It's an overall strategy of what you're trying to do and where you're trying to go. This first thing that we have here, as far as user access and productivity, when you look at these, right, user accounts, endpoints, apps, network, that's really what we've been talking about today, and how those Defender products fit in, and how you can reach that and start going towards that Zero Trust Rapid Modernization Plan here and reaching a Zero Trust standpoint. Because when you have your devices that are out and you're controlling those through device attestation, you're not just putting them directly on the network, they're on a separate network, right? So they can't have a lateral attack that moves into servers. They can't just talk to every application without being checked. Servers can be, micro-segmented, say in Azure, and you can have some things that are in there. You have Sentinel that are managing like XDR and the signals across that. So that's where all of that starts to come together, and you can kind of place within that how you want to attack that, how your strategy would be aligned to that. So these would be like the next tiers that you're talking about. And you heard Jason talk a little bit about backups when we talked about ransomware, and how your data is protected. We talked about BitLocker with Windows, but there's more to that as well. Immutable backups, that's kind of the thing right now. So if you're running traditional backups to a normal file share, I mean, those have long been targets of ransomware malware. They go out, they look for it, they lock those backups up, and unless you had those offsite somewhere or a tape and you can bring those back, you're stuck. So immutable backups are pretty important, right? When you're in Azure and back them up, that's all API based. Those are immutable backups. When you're local, you're talking about Rubrik and some of the things that we do there. Those are write once type of technologies that protect all that data. So from a ransomware standpoint, are pretty important in your holistic strategy to covering that. And then you got security operations down here, which is more about that. Now the ones down here are probably more related to things you'll be talking around Azure and things like that tomorrow. But those would be like the next steps where you're increasing your operation efficiency, and really depends on size, how far you go with these type of things. So that's the first part. Like I said, looking at that, having that strategy. I think the zero trust here, starting with that, is a good one to start with. But then you can take that and layer in additional things that will help you further. So this is where the actual frameworks come in. So if we look here, out of the box, if you're not familiar in M365 and Azure, the different products, you're going to get access to Microsoft Secure Score. That actually is aligned, and they worked with here the Center of Internet Security as well, that they also provide baselines for different technologies, including Windows, Mac, Android, iOS, Microsoft 365. But these are what are called control-based frameworks. So what that means is it's very specific in its implementation. It's going to say in Azure Active Directory, go turn on MFA for your admins. It's going to say turn on BitLocker very specifically, right? So these are aligned to the technology, and they're the technology controls that you can use to work towards a strategy. They are typically the easiest ones to get started with because of this, right? They will elevate your security posture, and they're easy to turn things on overall. Now, to get a broader implementation of it, though, you might want to take these and layer these in with these other frameworks that we have. So NIST and ISO. So ISO 27001, for instance, and then we have our NIST, which is, some of you folks might have heard, the 853, 80171, the defense contractors, they have to deal with CMMC. But there's also a common one that's kind of the entry level one, the NIST cybersecurity framework. These are risk-based frameworks. They are really built around a holistic security program that you would deploy. They don't tell you specifically go turn on Azure AD MFA, but what they will say is they'll have a reference in there for protecting privileged accounts, and they'll say they are protected with a second form of authentication, right? So they're a little higher level. If you dealt with HIPAA and high tech, that's also, or HIPAA is a risk-based framework as well. High tech's a little more prescriptive, but that's where they fall in. So you can actually take your secure score or the CIS benchmarks; those can be layered into one of these frameworks to give you a more holistic view, and you're more targeting towards the risks in particular. So that can help you ensure that you're getting the coverage that you're wanting, right? Not necessarily, do I turn everything on? Does my entire environment need to be on and covered right away? But it might be, hey, I have my chief financial officer who's getting, targeted for spams in the environment and transferring funds, and perhaps some of these controls we need to apply to him to mitigate that threat. That's where these will help you implement those. And I will note, all of these risk-based frameworks, by the way, are also available in a product called Compliance Manager. So Microsoft essentially pulled these in, and they've given you a checklist that you can work within there. So they also help you walk through there if you're not familiar with them, and they essentially break them out. And individually, there's what's called a crosswalk, so that you can crosswalk these across what meets what other standard. So that would be typical if you do NIST CSF to start, you want to move into like an 800-171, which is larger. You can see where those controls overlap. Those crosswalks will provide you for that. CIS provides those as well for these common frameworks. So they say this is where this specific control maps to, say, the NIST framework, to make that a little easier. And again, that's in the Compliance Manager. Microsoft really has access to that. All righty. So finishing up, we've got a few things here, and then Jason talked about the mini workshops that we do. So we also do solutions assessments on security. He touched on that. That goes beyond just the Defender part of that. We talk about Defender, Azure, all of the secure score items there on how to implement that from the Microsoft side of things. Touches on probably as little or as a lot that makes sense there in terms of the tools that we've talked about based on what your licensing currently is. But we also have very specific products that are out there for getting started. As you'll see, if you're rolling out some of the Defender products and the identity products, you need help with some of the conditional access and those type of things, we can run a POC to run through those. Also, Azure Virtual Desktops, a lot of people want to see what those look like, how they interact with it, what's that experience for the users. So we can set that up and manage that for you. And then, the endpoint management POCs, which will vary in scope depending on what you're looking for, whether it's Intune with SCCM, kind of that co-managed scenario. So those are probably the three most relevant that we have going on today. If it's something that's in here that doesn't fit your needs, or you're looking for something in between there, let us know. We're happy to talk with you about that and figure out your next path forward.
Great. Thank you, Jesus. So we've had some chats going in the background. Jessica asked a question. I don't believe it got answered yet. She says, if those are being delivered to a third-party app, how does that attachment work?
Well, I'm going to infer that she's probably like controlling app as far as movement of that in a third-party app. So maybe like going to something like Dropbox and transferring that. There's a few things that work together in that. So from the cloud side, if you manage it, say you have Dropbox for Business, you can integrate that with that Defender for Cloud Apps. And that works alongside Azure AD so that it can tell when things are moving in there. And you can layer on some of like data loss prevention rules, for instance, and say, hey, anything with this tag can only be stored in OneDrive and not in Dropbox. That will kind of block that access when you're going through that session online. Now, if it's a Dropbox personal, for instance, that's kind of almost like a black box. We can't see that. You're not logging into that. We don't have access in there. But what you can do is use Defender for Endpoint there to protect your work content. So content that's downloaded, maybe it's synced with OneDrive and you don't want it to go over that, and you can restrict access from that with some of those endpoint management controls, as well as like the Defender for Endpoint access there. Now, there's another option, and again, that let's say we have that, but we need to leave access into personal accounts. From that standpoint, then you're really looking more at how do I protect the data and where that lives, right? Because if I don't have control of the application, I don't have control of the stream, so to speak, and I don't have control of the endpoint, well, the only thing I currently have control in that scenario is the actual data itself. So then I have to look at how can I apply some of the data protection rules, as long as the Azure information protection is what comes into this play, and sensitivity labels, and then encrypting the actual document itself. So that's where you can put that label on there and say only somebody in HR can access this doc. And so while it's on HR, it's fine. I can open it. But if I drop it into Dropbox, it's still fine. But let's say I offboard that person from HR later. When you open up that doc, it's going to call home and say, hey, you're no longer allowed to open the doc. And then that's going to be closed off to you. So as you can see, it's going back to what we talked about, kind of the defense in depth, defense in layers on how you approach that. It's really about the scenarios and the risks that you're trying to mitigate from that, on which levels of different controls you need to implement.
Great, thank you. And I believe I don't know if we necessarily answered your question, Joshua, on your users forgetting passwords, but I believe we instigated a significant amount of chat to hopefully at least give you some ideas to better help with that.
Yeah,
Jesus,
on that
I'll
one,
have Jesus
just
scan
real
that
quick at a high
the chat
level.
a little bit in the background. So, Jason,
Sorry.
did you want to add a comment?
Yeah, I was just saying to kind of close the loop on that one so that we'll save a little bit of back in chat. John's correct that forgot password is absolutely where that's at. You just have to answer the challenge that comes back via email, and then the MFA policies and things like that are in place to be able to reset your password and have but you need bidirectional sync from Azure Active Directory there to write back to on-premises if you're in a hybrid mode. So that's the way you kind of reduce those and direct people to that when they're not logged in. The challenge is that most of them get confused because if they're logged in and they're just like saying, hey, your password's going to expire in X amount of days, they go to the change password portion, and that does require you to know your old password because you're already authenticated. So there's two different routes you can do that through the web access where you can reduce that help desk volume. And in terms of password managers, I mean, solutions like LastPass and things like that are just industry standard for that. I mean, it's there's a lot of them out there, but the popular ones for being able to do that just really becomes a challenge of standardizing and educating your end users on the use of a password manager for managed passwords as opposed to kind of the volume that you have.
Great. Thank you. And Joshua, no worries on using this as a forum. I love it. I love the conversation. So
yeah, to add on to that, to add some color, I touched on passwordless authentication and those flows. Those actually help as well because typically you're going to pair those with longer password reset policies. I know we still have a lot of people that want to do 30, 60 day, 90 resets. But those have been found to just not be secure. You get long passwords, people can't remember. They're just adding like one digit to the end. Those are easy kind of to run through different engines that are going to tackle that and find those. So it's really not as secure as you would think, right? You want to run through those when there's some event that causes that. If there's a reason to know somebody's password is compromised, the device has been compromised, you might force that at that point. Otherwise, that coupled with like MFA provides a lot of protection there. Also assuming we've closed down things like some of the legacy off that bypass or MFA, that will reduce that significantly. And then once you look towards some of the passwordless options in Windows Hello for Business, you're not even using a password, which means it's even less likely that you have to deal with that.
Great. Thank you. So I believe we have almost pretty much gotten ourselves back on track with timing. So great discussions. Appreciate it, Jesus. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break right now. So we will be back at 11:25. So just a 5-minute break for bio break. And then when we come back, we're going to have John, who is one of the sales engineers here at Egroop, talking about modernizing file management with Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive. So look forward to seeing everybody back here in about 5 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everybody. So, our last and final presentation for today. John is going to, as I said, talk to us about modernizing file management. And as Carly mentioned earlier in the chat, today is day one of our roadshow. So we do have day two tomorrow. So if you have not already registered for that and you're interested in hearing about Azure, please make sure to register for tomorrow's event and come back and see us then. You'll notice that there is a lot of crossover between what's being done with Microsoft 365 and Azure. So stay tuned to that. So John, it's all yours.
All right, well, great. And hello, everybody. And I have to tell you, I'm learning quite a bit just sitting in on these different sessions. And I was struck that even something like a topic like passwords and how to manage passwords should be relatively simple, but there's lots of possibilities and capabilities. And I think, figuring out what's right for your company and your user base, I think that's part of the art of it, and we're certainly here to help with that conversation as well. But this topic is more around modern file management. And I think this intro slide kind of describes it all. This is perfectly modern. It's color-coded and well-indexed and organized. And this may have been something used in the past, but it's certainly not modern and doesn't come with a lot of capabilities. So with that, here's some of the things that I see, in the modern work environment today. And I think we have some new challenges in the last couple of years, and certainly some that have been around for a while. But certainly when it comes to storing files, and that's people's productivity files and their work files, being able to do that outside the office has become critically important. And making those accessible from everywhere, having people have different ways to get at their files depending on where they are tends to be confusing. So, and what I mean by that is, do I have to turn the VPN on, and how does that work, and what levels of security do I need to go through that? Another big challenge, and depending on, where you're operating in the world, certainly in the US, we have good connectivity. As you go more international and in developing countries, that gets to be a little bit more challenging. So solutions need to be able to function when they're mostly connected, which means sometimes they're not connected, and sometimes you don't know when that's going to happen. And as I was preparing this morning, I actually added this next one in, and I don't mean this terribly negatively, but sometimes we provide great solutions like file servers and backup systems, and we tell our users, hey, this is where you should store your files. But that sometimes doesn't always happen, and someone comes in and says, well, I didn't really save it there and I've lost it. What do I do? Those are certainly big concerns. And earlier from both Jesus and Jason, we talked about even the security of our files, both when we're trying to share them and use them. Lately in the last couple of years, I think ransomware has become a very public topic. With some big breaches and some big expense around ransomware. So we certainly want to protect ourselves with those things. And then more things around productivity. How do I develop my work and data and files? How can I share those with others? How can I actively in real time collaborate with others? Those are more and more becoming important things. From the times of sending files around through email and trying to piece back in the input, I think everybody's probably have seen some challenges around that. So, and another part of it is cost. There's certainly very elaborate file sharing solutions, but they do cost. And training, we were talking about in the password topic, just getting users aware of capability and function. It has to be simple. It has to be easy to use. Otherwise, people don't tap into it. So these are all, I think, just a few of the problems we're faced with. And one of the thoughts I was having is, what if we could solve all those problems with something we might already have? I think that would be incredibly powerful. And so let me describe a little bit of the evolution of file management as I've seen it. And I think I won't go back through all time on parchment papers and scrolls, but certainly with computer systems, that used to be local storage. My computer, my C drive, I'm storing files on there. Of course, the problem is there's no backup. If I lose data or I delete a file, sometimes I can recover it. If I've waited too long, I can't. So, there have been some intermediate solutions like primitive backups, or in some cases, we even have maybe scripts that copy it to network drives to do the backups off the network systems. And then we moved into file servers and shared drives. I think some of the old nomenclature is that, the H drive for, my home user directory. I teach my staff to store files there, and maybe I have an F drive or a G drive or something where I have departmental shares. And then we got into things like early SharePoint that were web-based only solutions, and developed into more modern solutions, more protected solutions. And certainly some of the modern solutions come with a great deal of productivity around being able to share, and some other features we're going to talk about in a little detail, but certainly around OneDrive and Teams and modern SharePoint. That's the way I see the evolution. And the further out to the right in upper right quadrant you go, the more you're looking at modern solutions that allow you to be more productive and keep your system safe and secure. So I'm going to touch on each one of these, OneDrive, Teams, and SharePoint, and just give you a little feel of why I think you're more protected and have better productivity. So this slide really, these all sort of look the same, right? I've got three graphics here. I've got my PC, I've got my documents, and I would tell you on the farthest left, that first graphic, that's what Windows File Manager shows me, and I'm storing my files there. But that's sort of the left side of that evolution. It's a local storage. If something happens to my PC and I lose my PC or the drive goes bad, I've lost all my files. The more modern solution is wrapped around OneDrive. And somewhat related to the password conversation, it's hard to inform people new ways to do things, but the two graphics on the right are both OneDrive. So if I'm used to storing things on my PC in my documents, and you can see, this actually happens to be mine, they look the same, but the two solutions on the right are all OneDrive. So whether I access it from OneDrive or whether I access it from my PC, my documents, this is all cloud-based solutions. And why would that be helpful? Well, one is you don't have to teach anybody anything new. They can continue to do things the way they are. You can educate them over time as to what actually is happening, but what are some of the biggest benefits? In an organization I used to work at, I was trying to figure out how to position this to users. And, to me, the biggest benefit wasn't I have automatic backups, but to a lot of people it was. So just the fact that if I lose my PC, I still have my data. If I have a hard drive failure, I still have my data. If I'm going to get a new PC, it simplifies things for me to just get up and running on my new PC. I don't have to do backups and restores or have the IT team do those things. And then it comes with some other really nice features like, certainly if you make a mistake in a file, not only do you have a backup that you can go to, but you have versions that you can go back to. So maybe I just want to go back to what I had yesterday. I've got a complex Excel file. I'm making some changes. I've goofed it up. I think it's harder to figure out what I've changed than going back to a prior version. I can simply access versions of files and pick the ones that I need. I mentioned, when I lose a computer, I have an automatic backup. But even as I'm provisioning a computer, that process gets easier for my help desk team, and it's the consistent view to my user. And some other features that I'm going to go into a little bit more is, the accessibility of these documents from multiple PCs, from multiple devices. And I think one of the last benefits I'll get into is you can also decide how you want to manage the storage on this. So I can store everything on my C drive and have it synced into the cloud. Or I can have it all cloud-based so that it's only in the cloud. Or I can do a mix and match of both. And what that lets me do is sometimes I can get away with a little less storage on my local device, even though I'm still have access to all my files. And I mentioned one of the challenges earlier about operating in a disconnected environment. So I've had some experience of working in some countries that definitely are low bandwidth, occasionally disconnected, maybe mostly disconnected. And I think the beauty of this solution is with OneDrive, I can still access my files regardless if I'm connected or not. So that means while traveling, I can still access my files and make changes and work as I normally would. Or if the internet goes down, I can continue to do work. And as soon as there's an internet connection available, all the changes automatically sync up relatively quickly. This also makes great use of low bandwidth scenarios, so it can make those updates in the background even over low volume. So I'm not necessarily waiting for a synchronization to happen. So those are some of the benefits of OneDrive and what it looks like to users. And this really, speaks to that local storage, the C drive storage, and how I can bring that into a more modern solution. We also talked about some of the security features around this, and I think Jesus touched on this too. OneDrive and SharePoint and Teams are all protected by Defender for Office, as well as the Defender for Endpoint for local storage. So that's a little bit about OneDrive. Let me show you a little bit about SharePoint. And there was a question earlier about when do I use which products? So as we sort of talk into the SharePoint slides, OneDrive I really see as a replacement for users' local storage, where it's mostly individuals or very small groups of people working on files and collaborating on those files. And for SharePoint, I see this as more of mapping network drives, the old F drives and G drives and the departmental shares map into SharePoint. So on the left is the old method, local disk. Network drive is really what I was focused on. Unfortunately, I don't have any network drives anymore. All of my information is stored in SharePoint, but it represents very similar. Instead of the network icon, I'm looking at my organizational the organization name and drilling into the things that are shared with me. And I can choose to sync them down to my desktop. Again, managing the space where I can have everything be cloud-based. I can have it all be replicated locally. I can choose and mix and match how I want to do that. But to the end user, it's not a horrible leap to say, well, just instead of the network, it's the company name, and all the file shares and directories appear underneath them just as they normally would. So, what are some other benefits of, why SharePoint, why OneDrive? Another thing is, highly searchable, and you can even set policies around retention and how you want those documents to be managed. That's been historically a very difficult problem in terms of, data just seems to grow. It's rare that we actually can come off some of it. So I definitely see SharePoint as a replacement for file shares, departmental shares and F drives and G drives. And I feel like I'm using some really old nomenclature, but I've seen some of our customers still sort of on the journey toward, modern and protected and productive. So the other thing that I mentioned about SharePoint and OneDrive, and we're going to talk about Teams a bit too, is some other additional features is even on my C drive, on my OneDrive, I can share files with others and let them actively edit or just view. So I talked before about, sort of the old model was, let me grab a file, I'm going to email it around to my colleagues, get some input. As that input comes in, I'm going to have to go copy or update their suggestions into the file, maybe send a new version around. If I've got 3 or 4 people to work with, it gets very difficult. But being able to share files off of your OneDrive and SharePoint and Teams people are all working off the same copy. So I see some huge benefits to that. In Teams, Teams is another area where you can store files. Teams, I think, as Jason mentioned, can bring a lot of different work functions together, like IM and conferencing like we're doing today, the webinars, but it also allows you to set up groups that can work together. And one of those capabilities is to share files. So I can access those files inside of Teams. I can also have document libraries and SharePoint sites brought into Teams as well. And if I choose to, I can sync my team files down to my desktop so that I can travel with them. So, again, the icon on the right describes sort of the cloud-based solutions. That middle option is a team site, and that team site can be replicated down to my workstation so I can have easy access to it. I'll just share this sort of personal thing for me is we have some templates that we typically use, and I synchronize those down to my computer through, well, you can see it. It's sales and marketing templates, and I have easy access to that particular set of templates. It's very easy to use, and I can certainly do it through SharePoint, but I can do it through my file manager, copy and paste it into a working directory that I'm going to use, and go from there. So, not only do I have it on my computer, but I also wanted to show you that I have accessibility from any kind of device that has a browser. Phones and tablets have these apps that are available as well. So some of the accessibility for Teams and OneDrive and SharePoint is much greater than it ever was. And I talked about, VPNs and needing to use VPNs to get to file server shares. I think those days could be behind us if we choose to, because this is securely accessible from anywhere in the world with an internet connection. So I'm going to pause there because I do see some questions coming in. I haven't actually been able to read any of them. Krista, are there any that we want to tackle now?
Yes, John, we have a question. Is OneDrive a part of SharePoint Online? So if I lock access to SharePoint Online through IP restriction and access control, will this also lock OneDrive down?
I might need a little help with that answer in terms of the.
Yeah, I'll weigh in on that one because we're doing that exact same use case with a client right now where we're doing a phased rollout of Office 365 from a G Suite migration where we want to provide them certain services, but while things are synchronizing from one environment to the other, you don't want them to live in two places at once. So the short answer is yes, it is part. They rely on the same underpinnings of technologies, but you can separate those through the conditional access policies to provide access to one without the other from a interface standpoint. It's honestly not the cleanest, but it's doable. Jesus, you were going to say something there?
No, you hit it. I mean, that's what Wilson's asking about. It's definitely through the same access plane, right, from the identity plane when we're talking about things like conditional access and where you're restricting access from. They're both going to get triggered.
The thing, if I recall correctly, you don't want to do is you can't disallow access to SharePoint and have OneDrive operate. But what Jesus means by the identity plane, the key there is to disallow access to SharePoint from the authentication side on the conditional access side, even though when they have SharePoint enabled. So they have SharePoint, they just don't have ability to access it, but they can access OneDrive. Is the kind of how you go about making that happen. And on the other question about the D drive, I was trying to think of the easiest way to type this, so I'll just say it. Maybe a little bit easier. I don't know a way of redirecting. Well, I should say I don't know if it's possible to redirect an entire drive letter like en masse to OneDrive. That's something we can research, but through a combination of policies and like known folder moves and things along those lines, you can automate the movement at scale. But that you're bringing in VDI as the example, that raises a lot of other questions when talking about use of OneDrive in a VDI environment. So might be worthy of a detailed discussion, because obviously OneDrive we'll have to get into, like, is it persistent, non-persistent VDI? What's actually on those files in the D drive to come up with the best way? But in short, when doing VDI, that's where some of the known folder redirection policies that we can really take advantage of allow you to kind of create a policy that applies to many people. And then the other thing you have to worry about, particularly in a non-persistent scenario, is ensuring that you're not synchronizing data with OneDrive to those VDI instances, unless there is persistency of those disks and they're getting attached to the VDI environment, which is likely. But there's some things that we would want to double check before we make a recommendation that puts you in a bad scenario.
Yep, and let me just kind of cover a few more slides and then take a few more questions, if that's okay with everybody, because we're sort of leaving off on some of the value of OneDrive and SharePoint and Teams. Is I can use it on the in the cloud on a web. I can use it on any devices. I can replicate it down to those devices. So I've got a lot of flexibility, and it doesn't look that much different to a user. It can look like my local storage and some network shares. So I just want to revisit, some of the challenges that I talked about earlier, and talk about this evolution and why I think there's some advantage of moving into more productivity and more protection. Talked about, being able to work from anywhere in the world, not just home, but on an airplane, whether I'm connected or not, and I can access my data anywhere. The other thing we didn't touch on is, because I'm replicating it down to my computer, I get local speeds. So if I'm over a slow speed connection and I'm using, some file shares, those are almost, many of you might know, that's almost impossible. But if I'm replicating that data down to my computer and I'm synchronizing it, I can operate on a low bandwidth connection. We touched a little bit on security and ransomware. Because this is in the Office environment and Defender's a great capability within the suite, you have protection against that. And I touched a little bit on the sharing and collaborating. Whether I'm in Teams, OneDrive, or SharePoint, I can share files with people in a secure way. I can do that on OneDrive with people in my organization or outside my organization. So the ability for me to be more productive, because I'm not copying and pasting people's changes in. And in some cases, I can do it real time. I don't even have to wait. I can have a shared document that I can go in on a meeting with teams and collectively add at the same time and build documents. So, and again, the last one, the ease of use, it doesn't look that much different than it used to. And I think that helps users make the leap. So, I just want to talk through, and I realize we're running a little bit short on time, but talk through a couple use cases, whether it's a small company with 5 people in it that has a file server that they're using, as a shared area, or large companies in the thousands. We've had a lot of experience and see the same outcomes. Every company has some nuances, and another thing I'll mention is, these OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams may not meet 100% of your needs. It might, like for some small companies, I might even say it's highly likely. There may be some nuances. Jason touched on it earlier around maybe there's some media files, or there's some applications that actually need drive letters or UNCs. Maybe there's some specific things that can't make the leap to these modern technologies. But I don't think 10% of a problem shouldn't stop 90% of a solution. So, again, I think we're seeing this across the board, whether it's small companies or large. Just because we're a little bit short on time, I'm happy to share some of the different stories and successes that clients have seen, certainly through any kind of conversation. But I think, these modern tools and capability are so powerful. I'm excited to be able to help clients sort of work their way and find their way to them. I saw some questions that I think we're going to get back to in some specific cases, but we've had experience with lots of customers, lots of files, and great approaches to making sure that we're migrating with permissions, with access, and really mapping those out and doing it in a way that, works for organizations. Two of the things that we offer are assessments and migration. So if it's something that you're considering and you want to ask, several questions and run different, case scenarios by us, we're happy to have those conversations. Or if it's, I think this is the right thing, let's talk about how we can actually make the migration successful and identify like what we want to do. So, I'm excited to be part of Egroop because I'm happy to help clients make this leap. I think it's one of the biggest jumps you'll get for your users in terms of productivity and capability, and solve some of those problems we talked about earlier. So I think that's where we'll end the conversation today. Again, just kind of looking back at the chats. Krista, any other additional questions that we want to tackle?
We do. We have one that did not get answered yet. It's from Mac. He says, I have group policies and some old security groups that map all users to the corporate file server. If I move all accounting data to a SharePoint site, how do I migrate all the permissions and auto laptop mapping functions?
So part of that I can answer, and part of that I'm curious what Jason and Jesus might want to add to that. But there are tools that allow you to make, particularly if you're going from, Microsoft servers, in a domained environment with permissions, to migrate those permissions as well as the files, as well as the document ownership, and map those into SharePoint document libraries. And as far as the second part of that question, I forgot what it was.
I think it was mapping the users right for access.
There you go.
So that so the sync line, what John showed earlier when he was showing like what it looks like with the normal user experience, how it's integrated. The sync line can also be paired up with the SharePoint sites, and through policy you can set those up so users are linked to it. I mean, there are considerations on who's using it, what files are in there, and some other things that you have to take into consideration when making that move as well. But that's really where it would be. You wouldn't map it like as a traditional file share, although technically there's a possibility for doing it there. That's really setting you up kind of for a poor user experience, and it's not really meant to be used in that way. So I definitely try to get people away from that as soon as possible, because if you do some quick Googling or searching, you'll find that. But it's generally not the best solution. If you need it on the desktops, you want to stick with the sync client for those typically. And if you need that traditional file share experience, but are still looking for the cloud portion of that, that may move you outside of M365. You might be looking at things like Azure Files, maybe to support that type of scenario. And there are solutions for that as well.
Great. Thank you, Jesus. And that is all the questions that we have. So I am going to turn it over now to I'm going to say the hostess with the mostest. Carly from our marketing team is the one who's going to be giving away a prize. And we just want to remind everybody quickly, as Jason is sharing again and pointed out at the beginning of the session today, please feel free to reach out to us if you're looking to move ahead with any of these projects in the future. We can check to see if possible, if there's any programs, funding, or anything along those lines that Microsoft currently offers that are applicable to your business and your company. Again, as Jason said, it's lots of boxes to check to make sure you qualify, but we're happy to check to see if you do qualify. So, Carly.
Thanks, Krista.
Yes.
Hey, before Carly jumps on and does the prize, we'll get everybody out on time. Just want to remind everybody, what are the real ways that we can actually make this happen, right? So, as mentioned, everything we talked about in mass today is part of our Microsoft 365 Modern Workplace Roadmap exercise. We can tackle that in chunks, as needed, kind of the check boxes I mentioned that go deeper into all of these topics. And those are just conversations that we need to have that aren't engagements that we need to book. It's just, we have some questions. We want to know how to do this. We want to engage and we want to be helpful. I love the questions today, particularly, just all over the place. But as a reminder, some of the first things we're going to ask is, what are your goals, as opposed to, what are the tactical things, to make sure that we're giving you a complete answer. So understanding your goals is important to us, so that we can make sure that we don't just kind of play whack-a-mole with the individual items, but we provide you a complete answer that's going to lead you to a complete solution. And then lastly, whether we're talking about a file migration, whether we're talking about identity and security, whether we're talking about security overall, we have the assessments, the roadmaps, the mini workshops. Just kind of give us a shout and let us know your goals, let us know where you're at, help us understand, kind of where you're at in that journey, and we can provide the roadmap to go forward. But just want to reiterate, thank you for everybody's time. I know it's a large commitment, and without further ado,